In the year 2030, within the Republic of South Korea, large-scale military operation had commenced with the sole objective of destroying the massive communication tower. The battlefield was a scene of utter devastation. Bodies lay scattered, wreckage smoldered, and the once stable ground was now painted with destruction. Smoke and ash filled the air, the scent of blood lingering in the aftermath of intense combat. Amidst the ruins, a lone figure sat, his body heavily injured, his breathing labored. His wounds were severe, and his survival seemed nothing short of a miracle. Yet the pain was unbearable, his body barely holding on. His eyes searched the wreckage, and through his blurred vision, he spotted a familiar figure nearby, his friend, Hyun-sung, also gravely wounded. Hyun-sung's body was covered in deep gashes, his uniform drenched in blood. His state was critical, yet despite the agony, there was still an ounce of life within him. His body trembled as he questioned his own survival, unable to comprehend why death had not already taken him. Every breath he took was agonizing, as if his very existence had become a punishment. Summoning the last of his strength, Hyun-sung reached into his uniform and pulled out a small device. With feeble hands, he handed it over. A song began to play through the earphones, a soft melody filling the space between them. As the music reached his ears, a strange relief washed over him. Though his injuries remained, the pain seemed to lessen, his mind feeling slightly clearer. The moment of reprieve was brief, as he soon began to wonder what would happen once he was gone. He questioned how his friend Commander would go on, knowing that boredom and solitude would take over in his absence. Kay stood in silence, his gaze heavy with contemplation. After a brief moment, he acknowledged the thought. Hyun-sung, despite his condition, found solace in the song, expressing how it brought him an unexplainable sense of calm. With what little strength remained, he mentioned that if he were to go to heaven, he would seek out idol groups. Though weak, he managed to smile at his own remark, curious as to why that would even matter. His strength dwindled rapidly, and with his final breath, he made one last plea for Commander to survive, no matter what. The battlefield grew eerily still as Commander turned toward his friend, but it was too late. Hyun-sung's body had already fallen limp, his life extinguished. Though the grief weighed heavy on him, Commander knew there was no time to mourn. The battle was still ongoing, and his friend's sacrifice could not be in vain. With renewed determination, he turned away from the lifeless form and moved forward, pushing through the agony that threatened to consume him. In the distance, a group of soldiers observed a monstrous figure lurking in the ruins. Without hesitation, they rushed toward the creature, opening fire. Bullets tore through the air, yet the monster remained unscathed, undeterred by their assault. It moved with unnatural speed, deflecting their attacks as if they were mere annoyances. The soldiers quickly realized that their weapons were useless. Panic set in as the creature prepared to strike. With an overwhelming burst of force, it lunged forward. In an instant, it tore through them, ripping through flesh and armor with terrifying ease. Screams of horror echoed as one by one, the soldiers fell. A desperate voice crackled through the radio, calling out to their leader, warning him that their bullets were ineffective and that the troops were being wiped out. At that moment, the battlefield shifted. A man, Lord Ian, stepped forward, his sharp gaze locking onto the creature. With a firm command, he ordered his men to cease fire. The soldiers obeyed, confused but trusting their leader's judgment. In a blur of motion, Lord Ian propelled himself toward the monster, his speed unmatched. He closed the distance in mere seconds, catching the beast off guard. But despite his swift approach, the creature's reflexes were even sharper. It managed to block his initial strike. The impact sent Lord Ian stumbling backward, yet he did not falter. Regaining his footing, he launched a counterattack, this time with even greater force. Sparks of blue energy erupted upon impact, illuminating the battlefield. The monster's darkened skin pulsed with energy, but Lord Ian realized the distraction too late. A counterstrike landed, sending him reeling. The surrounding soldiers shouted in alarm, yet Lord Ian remained resolute. His gaze burned with intensity as he declared the battle to be over. The monster, despite its relentless nature, had finally been defeated. With the battle reaching its climax, Lord Ian wasted no time. He issued immediate orders to plant bombs across the area. A war was set to begin within minutes, and there was no room for hesitation. As the soldiers scrambled to complete their task, a sudden shift occurred. The portal began to open. From its depths, an alien entity emerged, its presence radiating an ominous energy. Despite the chaos, Lord Ian remained composed. His focus shifted to the creature, questioning whether it intended to flee toward its headquarters. The alien, rather than responding, twisted its grotesque features into a sinister smile before bursting into laughter. Its eerie voice rang out, proclaiming that soon its kind would arrive in full force. Lord Ian remained unfazed. The same words had been uttered for over a decade, and yet humanity still stood. Without warning, the alien lunged forward, delivering a devastating blow. The attack landed, but a barrier protected Lord Ian from its full force. Without pausing, the creature continued its onslaught, striking repeatedly until the barrier began to crack. The moment it shattered, Lord Ian retaliated, unleashing a powerful strike. With unwavering conviction, he recalled an event from 3 years ago, a time when he had captured one of these creatures after it had slaughtered humans. On that day, the alien had begged for mercy, a sight that had solidified his belief that they could indeed be defeated. Fueled by that memory, he delivered a final, crushing blow. The alien's body convulsed, its grotesque expression twisted in terror. Lord Ian relished the sight, deeming it the most beautiful view, fear overtaking a creature that once viewed humans as nothing more than prey. With ruthless precision, he tore the alien's arm from its body. As the portal's energy intensified, someone shouted a warning. The countdown for the bomb had reached 0. In an instant, an explosion erupted, engulfing the entire tower in flames. The force of the blast sent shockwaves across the battlefield, its intensity consuming everything in its path. The surviving soldiers looked toward the destruction, their thoughts consumed by the fate of their captain. Amidst the raging inferno, Lord Ian felt his body disintegrating, his consciousness slipping. A distant voice echoed, remarking that he had truly done it. Confusion settled in as his vision blurred. The last thing he saw was the monstrous entity vanishing into the void. Yet rather than succumbing to death, something strange occurred. His eyes fluttered open, and he found himself in an unfamiliar place. The battlefield was gone, replaced by a mysterious room. His body, once on the verge of disintegration, was now whole. A heavy sensation settled upon him. His limbs weighed down, as if bound by an invisible force. Struggling to make sense of his surroundings, he forced himself to move. Staggering to his feet, he scanned the area, his mind racing with questions. Everything was different, unfamiliar, yet eerily real. His priority shifted to understanding his condition. With unsteady steps, he approached a mirror, desperate to assess his own reflection. As he gazed into the mirror, a wave of shock and confusion overtook him. The reflection staring back at him was completely unfamiliar. This was not his body. Everything had changed. His heart pounded in his chest, fear gripping him as he struggled to comprehend what had happened. A terrifying thought crossed his mind. Was this some kind of experiment? Had he been subjected to some twisted manipulation? His surroundings only deepened his unease. The interior of the room was unlike anything he had ever seen before, resembling the grand halls of a medieval castle rather than a high-tech facility. With his mind racing, he turned away from the mirror and approached the window. Pushing it open, he peered outside, only for his confusion to intensify. Below, soldiers clad in armor patrolled the grounds, their steel plating glinting under the light. But something about their armor caught his attention. It was different, unlike any he had ever encountered. The design, the craftsmanship, the very essence of it felt foreign. A sense of unease settled over him as he considered the possibility that this was not an illusion or a simulation. The uncertainty gnawed at him, but he was not one to be easily deceived. If this was some elaborate trick, he refused to fall for it. His instincts kicked in, urging him to find a weapon. Scanning the room, his eyes landed on a sword and shield mounted on the wall. Without hesitation, he moved toward them, reaching out to claim the sword. However, the moment he grasped the hilt and attempted to lift it, he was met with an unexpected struggle. The weapon was far too heavy. A surge of frustration coursed through him. His previous body would have wielded it effortlessly, yet now he could barely move it an inch. The stark contrast between his former strength and his current weakness enraged him. Realizing that he had no other choice, he turned his attention to a smaller weapon, a dagger. This one, at least, he could lift without difficulty. Gripping it tightly, he steeled himself, determined to assess his surroundings and understand his situation. His security was compromised, and in a body as weak as this one, he needed to be cautious. He had no allies, no knowledge of where he was, and no certainty of whether he was in immediate danger. Cautiously, he moved toward the door and opened it, his eyes scanning the hallway beyond. What he saw made his breath hitch. A towering soldier, clad in heavy armor, stood before him. The sheer size and presence of the man were overwhelming, and for a brief moment, he wondered if he could even hope to defeat him. But before he could make any sudden moves, his attention was drawn to something far more concerning. There wasn't just one soldier. An entire battalion was assembled, their posture rigid, their presence exuding an immense pressure that nearly made him collapse. To his utter bewilderment, the soldier standing closest to him suddenly dropped to one knee, his voice booming as he addressed him with deep reverence. Immediately, every other soldier in the corridor followed suit, bowing their heads in submission. A wave of confusion washed over him. These warriors, who looked strong, powerful, and more than capable of handling themselves, were kneeling before him. His mind reeled as he tried to make sense of the situation. Stepping forward, he demanded answers, questioning what was happening, where he was, and who these people were. But the response he received only left him more perplexed. The soldier, unwavering in his respect, addressed him as Lord. This was not the answer he was looking for. The title meant nothing to him. What he needed was clarity. Who was he supposed to be in this world? The soldier introduced himself as Ian Alberon. The name meant nothing to him, but before he could process it, he was caught off guard once more. Without warning, Ion lifted him effortlessly, cradling him in his arms as if he were as light as a feather. The absurdity of the situation stunned him into silence. With genuine happiness in his voice, Ion expressed his relief at seeing his lord awake again, admitting that he had feared he would never regain consciousness. As the words sank in, an unsettling thought crept into his mind. Was he now living as some frail noble? The implications were disturbing. With the advanced technology possessed by alien forces, he couldn't entirely dismiss the possibility that they had somehow thrown him into this world, perhaps as an experiment or even a weapon. And if that were the case, then this medieval fantasy setting could very well be a fabricated illusion meant to distract him. Still, if this was a game, he prayed it wasn't one of those cliché genres that he despised. He had enough problems as it was. Ion soon set him down and announced that he would fetch the doctor. As he left, the muffled voices of two individuals could be heard outside the room. They spoke in hushed tones, discussing the Lord's condition. It didn't take much effort to realize that their conversation was laced with ulterior motives. They seemed to be taking advantage of the boy's fragile state, benefiting from his misfortune. One of them, an older man, urged caution, advising that their actions should be kept in moderation. His colleague, however, was more direct, suggesting that they secure 2 carriages of gold before the territory collapsed. The greed in his voice was unmistakable. The older man countered, reminding him that the security captain was an honorable knight, someone who wouldn't allow such corruption to take place. The heavier-set man scoffed at this remark, demanding to know if he was being accused of dishonesty. The older man, however, remained composed, suggesting that, for now, they should simply observe the situation carefully. As the conversation ended, a woman approached them. She warned them to be cautious regarding the Lord. Heeding her words, the man instructed her to continue monitoring him. The heavier man noted that the medicine given to the Lord seemed to be effective, which was a relief. With that, the two left, satisfied with the current state of affairs. Meanwhile, inside the room, the doctor had begun his examination. As he worked, the boy analyzed his surroundings once more, his mind racing with thoughts. So far, he hadn't encountered any immediate threats. Perhaps something had gone wrong with the teleportation, and if that was the case, he might be stuck in this world permanently. If escape was impossible, then adapting to this reality was his only option. To gain a better understanding of the situation, he asked for the doctor's name. The man introduced himself as Nakamo and explained that he had been in charge of the Lord's health for several years. This revelation sent a ripple of concern through the boy's mind. Based on Nakamo's words, this body had an established identity, one he knew nothing about. It didn't take long for the doctor to reach a conclusion. He suspected that the Lord had suffered memory loss, likely due to a severe fever. This assumption seemed to be widely accepted, and before the boy could respond, a soldier entered the room, announcing the arrival of the treasurer and administrator. The two men from before stepped inside, kneeling before him with rehearsed reverence. The moment they saw him sitting upright, their faces lit up with exaggerated relief. One of them, the heavier-set man, eagerly proclaimed that the sight of his energetic face had dispelled all of his concerns. He then took credit for providing the rare medicine that had supposedly saved his life. The boy forced himself to respond, outwardly expressing gratitude while internally wishing the man would leave him alone. But he had a bigger problem. His knowledge of this world was completely blank. Admitting to memory loss seemed like the best option, as it would explain any lack of familiarity. He calmly stated that since waking up, his memories had been blurred. The reaction was immediate. The heavier man's face twisted in panic. He turned to the doctor, demanding to know if he had turned the Lord into an idiot. His anger was palpable as he insisted on being given answers. The boy observed the outburst carefully, something within him whispering that something was off. There was more to this situation than what was being presented. Maintaining his composure, Lord Ian raised a hand, signaling Toman to calm down. Despite the treasurer's frustration, he reminded him that the doctor was his savior. Regardless of the memory loss he had suffered, it had been the doctor who ensured his survival when he was at death's door. The room fell silent as the doctor bowed deeply, expressing his gratitude for his lord's kindness. Observing the exchange, Gunn made it clear that from this point onward, he would have many questions. There were too many uncertainties, and he needed answers. Without hesitation, the doctor assured him that he was free to ask whatever he wished. However, behind the kind expression plastered across Toman's face, his thoughts were far from pure. If anything, he believed this sudden amnesia made deceiving the young lord significantly easier. Before the conversation could continue, Nose, the administrator, stepped forward. His tone carried urgency as he informed his lord that there was an important matter requiring immediate attention. A decision had to be made regarding the recruitment of mercenaries. Hearing this, Lord Ian furrowed his brows, questioning what exactly this entailed. Nose, remaining patient, explained that it was in order to enlist mercenaries under his name. Though Lord Ian acknowledged the explanation, he was more interested in the reason behind this recruitment. Nose clarified that the mercenaries were needed to subdue the monsters that had been attacking livestock and harming agricultural production. This revelation caused Lord Ian to pause, considering the implications. A thought crossed his mind, and with mild hesitation, he asked if these creatures were demons. The question seemed to confuse the administrator, who did not fully grasp what he meant. Rather than pushing the matter further, Lord Ian returned to the subject at hand. Nose elaborated that such subjugations occurred every 5 years, making this a standard procedure. Despite the information, Lord Ian was still uncertain. Having no knowledge of the current state of affairs, he lacked the confidence to make such an important decision. Just as he was about to approve the recruitment of mercenaries, Toman abruptly interrupted him. With an air of urgency, Toman strongly advised against making a hasty decision. The treasurer quickly pointed out that the financial state of the territory was dire. Hiring hundreds of mercenaries would require an enormous sum of money, something they simply could not afford. His words caused a moment of hesitation, prompting Lord Ian to ask just how severe the situation truly was. Reluctantly, Toman admitted that while hiring mercenaries was technically possible, they had no way of predicting what financial difficulties might arise in the future. Therefore, recklessly spending funds on an uncertain battle was a foolish move. Lord Ian pondered this response carefully before speaking. He recounted the issue at hand. Monsters were attacking people, killing livestock, and destroying valuable crops. Turning to Toman, he questioned whether he truly intended for him to stand by and watch as his people were massacred. Toman, now visibly sweating, struggled to respond. In a weak attempt to justify his stance, he claimed that all citizens were part of the resistance, implying that casualties would not be excessive. Furthermore, he argued that monsters were akin to natural disasters, uncontrollable forces of nature. If people died, then it was simply an act of fate, something only God could be blamed for. A sharp tension filled the room as Lord Ian's expression darkened. Without warning, he reached out and seized Toman by the collar, his grip firm and unyielding. The sudden action left everyone in the room stunned. The soldiers who had been standing by noticed an immediate shift in their lord's demeanor. Even Toman, who had been so confident in his manipulation, realized that something had changed. With unwavering resolve, Lord Ian declared that he would never abandon his people. If he, their leader, turned his back on them, then who else would protect them? His voice carried undeniable conviction, one that neither Toman nor the others could ignore. His words struck a chord, leaving all 3 men in the room momentarily speechless. Locking eyes with Nose, Lord Ian issued a firm order the mercenaries were to be recruited immediately. Without hesitation, Nose bowed his head in acknowledgement, quickly obeying the command. Without further discussion, both he and Toman exited the room. Once outside, Toman's frustration boiled over. His voice was laced with anger as he cursed the young lord's boldness. How dare a mere boy speak to him in such a way? Yet, as he fumed, the older man beside him chuckled. With an amused expression, he pointed out that just moments ago, Toman had been flattering the boy, only for his attitude to change so suddenly. Regardless, none of it mattered anymore. The old man then instructed Toman to begin preparing the budget estimates for the mercenary recruitment, knowing there was no longer room for negotiation. Elsewhere, a grand dining hall had been prepared, with an assortment of dishes spread across a lavish table. Seated before the feast, Lord Ian wasted no time, devouring the food with an insatiable hunger. Standing nearby, a soldier and the butler watched him, exchanging glances as they observed his unusually large appetite. Noticing their stares, Lord Ian paused, questioning their reaction. The butler, hesitant at first, eventually pointed out that his lord was eating far more than usual. Stretching out his arm, Lord Ian casually explained that he required more nutrients, having just awoken from a coma. However, his words only seemed to confuse the two, as they did not fully understand what he meant. Still, their confusion did not deter him. As he continued eating, he took a moment to appreciate the flavors, commenting that the meal was particularly delicious. He then inquired if there was more available. Pleased by his lord's enjoyment, the butler eagerly informed him that the dish was lamb soup, and he would be happy to fetch more. Without delay, he exited the room to fulfill the request. Left alone with the soldier, Lord Ian continued eating, but the lingering gaze made him uncomfortable. He turned to the man, addressing him directly. The soldier, named Rono, simply remained standing, declining the offer to eat. Finding it strange to be watched while dining, Lord Ian sighed, his expression darkening slightly. With a sharp tone, he stated that he would not repeat himself 3 times. A bead of sweat formed on Rono's brow. Realizing he had little choice, he reluctantly took a seat at the table. However, he still made no effort to eat. Instead, he remained stiff and unmoving, as though waiting for permission. Lord Ian, unimpressed by the hesitation, pointed toward the food and insisted that he take a taste. His words carried the weight of an order rather than a suggestion. With no other option, Rono finally reached for a serving of meat. As he took a bite, both men agreed that the quality was exceptional. As Lord Ian picked up a glass of wine, he spoke with a measured tone, reminding Rono that he needed to eat properly in order to maintain his strength. After all, if he were to protect his lord, he could not afford to be weak. As the conversation shifted, Lord Ian inquired about the number of soldiers currently stationed in the castle. Rono answered without hesitation. There were 300 soldiers in total, with half of them assigned to protect the castle itself. While half of the soldiers remained stationed at the castle, the other half had been dispatched under the command of the security captain to confront the growing bandit threat in the surrounding villages. The news piqued Lord Ian's curiosity, and he leaned forward, pressing for more details. The bandits had been raiding villages for some time now, and under the Lord's orders. The security captain had personally led a group of soldiers to the troubled areas in an effort to suppress them. Eager to know more, Lord Ian inquired about when the security captain was expected to return. However, Rono could offer no definitive answer, explaining that the sheer number of bandits had complicated the mission. Despite this uncertainty, he reassured his lord that there was little need for concern. After all, the security captain was widely regarded as the greatest swordsman in the kingdom. That revelation brought Lord Ian a sense of relief. If the strongest warrior in the land was leading the charge, then victory seemed inevitable. Intrigued, he asked for the man's name. Rono answered without hesitation, Charlene Deor. Meanwhile, deep in the heart of the battlefield, Charlene stood surrounded by bandits, the air thick with tension. The rough-looking men, emboldened by their numbers, sneered at him, one of them stepping forward with an arrogant grin. He openly mocked Charlene, ridiculing his choice to abandon the prestigious royal knights and lower himself to serving the Alron fields. The insult hung in the air, but Charlene remained motionless, his expression unreadable. One of the bandits, eyes gleaming with ambition, declared that this was his golden opportunity. If he could defeat Charlene, he would earn recognition as the greatest warrior on the continent. That thought alone filled him with a dangerous confidence. However, Charlene neither flinched nor responded. His body remained still, unwavering in the face of their taunts. Without warning, the bandits launched their attack. Those armed with crossbows raised their weapons, taking aim and preparing to fire. Sensing the incoming assault, Charlene moved at the last possible moment. His reaction was astonishingly swift, so much so that as the arrows hurtled toward him, he stopped abruptly, then sliced through them with effortless precision. One of the bandits mistook this for an opening and lunged at him, wielding a massive axe. Yet, even as the weapon came crashing down, Charlene barely seemed to exert any effort in his defense. With one powerful motion, he sent his attacker flying backward as if he were weightless. The sheer difference in strength was undeniable. A voice rang out among the bandits, shouting orders to reload their crossbows. However, before they could comply, a woman with striking silver hair stepped forward, her gaze fierce. She denounced their cowardice, disgusted by their reliance on ranged weapons instead of facing their enemy head-on. Her words only seemed to amuse one of the bandits, who countered that teamwork was their greatest strength. They had always fought together, lived together, and if need be, they would die together. The woman made a move to intervene, but Charlene raised a hand, signaling her to stop. He had no intention of accepting any assistance. His reasoning, however, was peculiar. He had never before witnessed such a strong bond between thieves. There was something oddly admirable about their loyalty, despite their criminal nature. One of the bandits, fueled by pride and anger, scoffed at the remark. He claimed to be a man of honor, loyal to his own, unlike Charlene, who bowed before nobles like a groveling servant. But Charlene simply exhaled, showing neither anger nor resentment. With a quiet finality, he raised his sword and declared that their wish for death would be granted. At that moment, a brilliant aura surrounded his weapon, its radiance illuminating the battlefield. The sight excited his opponent, who burst into laughter. Finally, Charlene was displaying his true power. But the bandit was not intimidated. He too possessed formidable strength. However, just as he was about to retaliate, something caught his attention. Beyond the glow of Charlene's sword, there was something far more menacing: the unmistakable weight of a deadly killing intent. Sensing the impending danger, the silver-haired woman instinctively raised her hand, ordering the soldiers to step back. A deep silence fell over the battlefield as the realization dawned: this was the end. Charlene's sword, glowing with the same hue as the moonlight, radiated an overwhelming force. It was in that moment that his title, the strongest swordsman in the kingdom, was truly justified. The sheer power emanating from him sent a paralyzing fear through the bandits. They were no longer warriors, they were prey standing before a predator. Desperation took hold, and the leader of the bandits shouted for his men to fire. They obeyed without hesitation, loosing a hail of arrows toward Charlene. But it was already over. With a single swing of his sword, everything changed. The bandits were cut down before they even had a chance to react, their demise swift and absolute. The power behind his strike was incomprehensible. As if by magic, their inevitable deaths arrived before they could even process what had happened. In his final moments, the bandit leader, his body failing him, uttered one last word. A single, shuddering accusation: monster. As the dust settled, the battlefield was left with only two figures standing: Charlene and his soldiers. The bandits had been utterly annihilated. Meanwhile, back at the castle, the doctor was busy preparing a potion intended to help the young lord recover his memories. Watching skeptically, Tommen questioned whether it would truly work. The doctor, though unable to provide absolute certainty, assured him that it would assist in the recovery process. However, he also admitted that there was no guarantee that it would restore the lord's previous personality. As he surveyed the dimly lit room, Tommen remarked on its familiarity, noting that it had once been an old wine cellar. The doctor confirmed this, explaining that it had been the lord himself who had repurposed it into a pharmacy. Tommen, however, seemed uninterested in this bit of history. Instead, he began muttering about the missing expensive bottles of wine, his tone accusatory. He expressed hope that they weren't being wasted for medicinal purposes. Without warning, Tommen lunged forward, seizing the doctor and forcefully pinning him down. His grip was unrelenting, his head pressed dangerously close to the cauldron. His voice was low, menacing as he issued a chilling ultimatum. The doctor had only two options: restore the lord to his former self, or suffer the consequences. If he failed, he would either have to bring back his memories or be left half dead himself. At that moment, the doctor's daughter entered the room, her innocent voice mentioning something about a lizard tail. Tommen, wearing a smug expression, released his grip and stepped away. He turned to leave, but not before repeating his command: the lord must return to the way he was. With that, the door slammed shut behind him, leaving an unsettling tension in the air. The doctor's fists clenched, his veins bulging in suppressed rage. His daughter, sensing his fury, hesitantly questioned what had just happened. Rather than answering directly, the doctor reacted impulsively. In a sudden outburst, he grabbed the cauldron he had been working on and hurled it to the floor, shattering it. His daughter flinched at the unexpected action. Without missing a beat, he reached for another cauldron, his voice sharp as he issued a command. He ordered her to fetch a volcanic centipede immediately. Confused by his sudden shift in behavior, she hesitated, but his tone left no room for argument. She quickly turned and ran to fulfill his demand, while the doctor's mind raced with thoughts of retaliation. Linda hesitated, her voice laced with concern as she informed her father that the volcanic centipede did not react well to the lord's body. Her worry was evident, yet the doctor was in no mood for hesitation. His voice rose sharply as he ordered her to fetch it anyway. There was no other choice. Though reluctant, she obeyed, leaving to retrieve the creature. Returning with the centipede in hand, she carefully placed it before her father. The doctor observed it for a moment before explaining his intent. He wished to see whether the medicine would truly enhance the lord's condition in the way Tommen desired. He had no illusions about Tommen's motives, but for now, he would proceed with the test. The following day, the castle's atmosphere was tense as the medicine was prepared and presented to the young lord. Linda stood before him, explaining that the centipede's properties would generate an intense amount of heat, stimulating his body's development. Lord Ian, however, was more concerned about something else. He turned to her, questioning who she was. A brief silence followed before the doctor answered she was his daughter. Hearing this, the girl knelt before him, her eyes searching his face for recognition. She questioned whether he truly did not remember her, pointing out that they used to speak frequently before his memory loss. Her sudden closeness caught him off guard, leaving him momentarily embarrassed. Shifting his attention back to the medicine, Lord Ian asked if it would strengthen his body. The doctor was quick to assure him that it would. However, Linda interjected, warning that if his body rejected the medicine, the effects could be lethal. Lord Ian considered her words carefully. The mere thought of consuming something that could kill him left him uneasy. His body was already weak, he was in no state to rule, much less to protect himself. If he remained as he was, he could die at any moment. A troubling thought entered his mind. What if this was an attempt to poison him? The doctor's daughter had already stated that the medicine had lethal risks, and her concern for his health seemed genuine. Was there a chance that this was all a deception? That he was being played for a fool? Despite his suspicions, he decided that there was only one way to find out. Without hesitation, he lifted the container and drank its contents. The moment the medicine touched his tongue, he regretted it. His expression darkened almost instantly, as an unbearable heat surged through his body. The doctor, closely observing, quickly asked how he was feeling. A wave of nausea hit him, and for a moment, he nearly vomited. Seeing his discomfort, the doctor stepped forward to assist, while Linda anxiously suggested that perhaps the medicine was not compatible with his body. Lord Ian struggled to suppress his reaction, covering his mouth in an attempt to keep the medicine down. His stomach churned violently, but he forced himself to endure it. Through clenched teeth, he managed to ask if anyone had something sweet. Before an answer could come, the man entered the room, his expression shifting to one of concern. Noticing the state of his lord, he immediately asked what was happening. Lord Ian tried to wave it off, wanting to insist that he was fine, but before he could finish his sentence, something felt off. A sharp, indescribable pain shot through his hand, rapidly spreading through his entire body. His muscles tensed involuntarily, and his breathing became uneven. The burning sensation intensified with every passing second, and the moment he tried to move, his limbs refused to obey him. Alarmed by his behavior, the man demanded an explanation. The doctor, his face grim, informed him that Lord Ian had taken the centipede medicine and that his body might not be reacting well to it. Realization dawned upon the man. This was the same medicine that had previously caused him to faint. Linda, in a panic, urged Lord Ian to vomit, believing it was the only way to stop the reaction. However, Lord Ian stubbornly gripped his own wrist, refusing to yield. Even with excruciating pain surging through him, he insisted that he was fine. Linda wasn't convinced. She turned to the man, urging him to lower their lord's body temperature before the situation worsened. Without wasting a second, the man lifted Lord Ian effortlessly and carried him toward the bath. The doctor and Linda followed closely behind, each of them on edge. Once in the bathing chamber, Lord Ian was placed into the tub, his vision hazy from the fever. His body trembled from both the heat and the rapid changes it was undergoing. Through his dazed state, he asked Linda for her name again. Patiently, she answered, confirming that it was indeed Linda. His voice hoarse, he asked if the medicine would work. Though Linda reassured him, she admitted that she had not expected such a severe reaction. The man, now visibly worried, questioned if Lord Ian would be all right. The doctor's response was simple. There was nothing more to do but wait for his temperature to drop. As the minutes passed, a servant entered, carrying a bucket of ice. Without hesitation, she poured it into the tub, the cold water shocking Lord Ian's overheated body. A heavy breath left his lips as the pain slowly began to fade. Looking up at the servant, he thanked her, admitting that he felt better now. Linda, however, seemed troubled. She blamed herself for his suffering, believing it was her fault for encouraging the use of the medicine. Yet, despite everything, Lord Ian was unbothered. He reassured her with a faint smile, telling her that he would endure it. A look of surprise crossed her face. She muttered that he had changed. Before, he would have complained endlessly, acting fragile and unstable. His previous self had been overwhelmed by hardship, but now he was different. Realizing that she had spoken too bluntly, Linda quickly apologized. However, Lord Ian dismissed it with ease, stating that thanks to her, his body had improved. She reached forward to check his temperature, but the coldness of her fingers from the ice startled her. Pausing, she instead asked for permission before leaning in, pressing her forehead against his to properly measure his fever. The unexpected closeness caused Lord Ian's face to redden slightly, but he remained still. Linda pulled back, nodding in approval his condition had improved. However, just as she was about to tell him that he could get out of the water, something caught her attention. His body temperature had suddenly risen again. Alarmed, she asked if he was truly all right. Lord Ian, despite feeling a bit lightheaded, responded that he was fine, just a little cold. As the sun rose over Alberon Castle, a new day began. Linda had remained by his side throughout the night, ensuring his condition remained stable. However, when her eyes slowly opened, she immediately noticed something strange. The bed was empty. Panic set in as she shot up from her seat, frantically scanning the room. Her voice rang out in distress. Lord Ian had disappeared. A voice behind her interrupted her panic. Calmly, he asked if she needed him. Turning around sharply, she found Lord Ian standing near the window. He seemed completely at ease, though the loud growl of his stomach betrayed his hunger. Rubbing the back of his neck, He admitted that he hadn't eaten anything since the previous morning. Then, with a casual smile, he extended an invitation. Did she want to have breakfast with him? Elsewhere, within the grand halls of Tallman's estate, a hooded figure approached. The servants, accustomed to their master's unusual guests, allowed the mysterious visitor to pass without question. Tallman awaited him in his private chamber, greeting him with familiarity. His lips curled into a pleased smirk as he addressed the figure by name Zaran. Seated in a lavishly decorated chamber, Zaran adjusted his cloak as he delivered the latest news. The young lord was alive and in excellent health. This revelation caused Tallman to release a sigh of relief. Securing another lord who would be as easily manipulated as before would have been a tedious task. However, something was undeniably off. The boy, despite appearing to be the same person, acted entirely different. Zaran raised an eyebrow, not quite grasping the concern. Seeing this, Tallman took a deep breath and began to explain. Previously, the young lord had been meek, obedient, easily influenced, but now he had begun making decisions on his own, disregarding the advice carefully placed before him. The most alarming change had been his willingness to hire mercenaries, a move that directly went against Tallman's recommendations. Zaran leaned forward, his expression darkening. If this continued, Tallman's grip over the kingdom's affairs would gradually weaken. The influence he had spent years cultivating would slip through his fingers. This could not be allowed to happen. With a smirk, Zaran proposed a simple yet effective solution: make the boy fall ill again. Tallman, rubbing his chin, considered the plan carefully. The young lord would suffer, but he wouldn't die. That much was certain. They only needed to weaken him, ensuring that he remained reliant on their guidance. If the boy was left alive but rendered incapable of standing on his own, everything would continue according to plan. Zaran chuckled, amused by the wickedness of their plot. Tallman, letting out a belly laugh, agreed wholeheartedly. Everything was already falling into place. Later that day, within the protagonist's castle, a butler carefully took Lord Ian's measurements. He observed, with mild surprise, that the young lord had grown significantly since the previous day. The unusual statement piqued Lord Ian's curiosity, prompting him to ask if this meant the tailoring would need to be redone. The butler, keeping his tone professional, reassured him. He would simply craft the clothing with extra room to accommodate further growth. Once the fitting was complete, Lord Ian and his butler exited the room, making their way through the castle corridors. Along the way, he greeted those he passed, exchanging brief pleasantries. However, when they reached an unfamiliar part of the castle, his interest was immediately drawn to a particular room. Stopping in his tracks, he turned to the butler and asked what the space was used for. The butler, slightly hesitant, informed him that it was an office. Without wasting a second, Lord Ian stepped forward, reaching for the door. The attendants nearby immediately reacted, trying to dissuade him from entering, but his curiosity had already taken hold. Ignoring their protests, he pushed his way inside. The moment he crossed the threshold, an eerie stillness settled in the air. Dust had gathered on every surface, and the room had a long-abandoned feel to it. Wrinkling his nose, Lord Ian voiced his displeasure, questioning why no one had bothered to clean the place. The butler, visibly uncomfortable, hesitated before giving an answer. The truth was simple, yet grim. This room had been marked for demolition, and the one who had issued that order had been Lord Ian himself. His brow furrowed as he took in the words. The information was entirely new to him, given that he had no recollection of the past. Curious to know more, he sat down on the nearby bed and urged the butler to continue. With a solemn expression, the butler revealed the room's dark history. It was here that the previous lord had met his end. For a moment, Lord Ian remained silent. Though he was surprised, his face betrayed little emotion. It was an unusual place to die, that much was certain. The man, standing nearby, observed his lord carefully before adding another crucial detail: the previous lord had not simply perished. He had been assassinated. Hearing this, Lord Ian instinctively masked his reaction. His memory was still a void, making it difficult to respond appropriately. The man, unaware of his internal struggles, continued. The former lord had been found dead at his desk, the very desk where Lord Ian now sat. As if to emphasize his words, he pulled back a cloth covering the surface. Faint stains of blood remained, preserved by time. Frowning, Lord Ian leaned in slightly, running his fingers over the old markings. He asked the inevitable question: who had killed him? The man shook his head. No one knew. The mystery remained unsolved. A realization struck Lord Ian as he processed everything. It was no wonder the former owner of this body had wanted the room destroyed. To be thrust into power so suddenly, in the wake of such a grim fate, must have been overwhelming. Still, rather than avoiding the space, Lord Ian made a firm decision. Moving toward the window, he gazed outside. The landscape stretched far and wide, with the village nestled between the dense forest and the towering mountains beyond. Turning back to the butler and chamberlain, he issued a direct order this room was to be transformed into his bedroom. Both men were taken aback by the unexpected declaration, but Lord Ian, smiling, simply explained his reasoning. From here, he could easily watch over the village. Entrusting the responsibility to Kull, he left the details in his hands. By evening, the castle was bustling with activity as the maids hurried to clean and prepare the newly designated bedroom. Word of the Lord's decision had spread, and soon, Tommen himself arrived at the scene demanding to know what was happening. A woman informed him of the Lord's decree. Tommen's eyes widened in disbelief. The boy had gone mad. Nearby, a man named Vicente was also struggling to comprehend the situation. When questioned, he could only repeat the Lord's reasoning that he wanted to be able to see the village from his quarters. Tommen frowned deeply. Something was changing. Perhaps the boy had started taking an interest in his own territory. If that was the case, then their plans would need to be adjusted accordingly. As the night deepened, Lord Ian remained awake, training his body. His weakness still frustrated him, and despite the exhaustion setting in, he refused to rest just yet. His butler soon arrived, informing him that the doctor's daughter had come to see him. Giving his permission, he allowed her to enter. Linda stepped forward, her gaze immediately scanning him. Observing his posture, she commented that he had grown taller. Lord Ian, unfazed, questioned why she was simply standing there. Ignoring this, she stated that she had something important to ask. Handing him a document, she waited as he began to read. His eyes quickly scanned the contents. It was a report detailing the expenses and budget required for the recruitment of mercenaries. Confusion crossed Linda's face when she noticed his hesitation. Realizing that she was expecting him to sign off on it, Lord Ian calmly explained his predicament. Since he had lost his memory, he could not authorize any document without first understanding its contents. The explanation made sense to her, and for the first time she began to grasp his perspective. Even if others were unaware of his amnesia, he could not recklessly place his stamp on matters he did not fully comprehend. Having made his decision, Lord Ian entrusted Linda with the task of reading and verifying the report. He did not want others to know that he was unable to read. Linda hesitated, but ultimately agreed. Lord Ian, pleased with her response, grew excited, remarking that he had chosen the right person for the job. However, the girl seemed uneasy. Shifting slightly, she hesitantly asked if he even knew what place. The realization that he had nearly lost his life without even being aware that he was burdened with a massive debt ignited a fury deep within the protagonist. An anger that only grew when he noticed how strange it was that no one had ever informed him of such a critical issue. His soldier, the man, also found the situation odd, pointing out that Tommen should have made him aware of the financial situation of his own territory, but instead, the treasurer had conveniently omitted such an important matter. Lord Ian clenched his fists, grinding his teeth in frustration, before finally declaring that the man was nothing more than a scoundrel. Cotton, standing nearby, acknowledged that things had gone too far, and without hesitation, the young lord gave a firm command Tommen was to be summoned immediately. The man hesitated slightly, questioning whether it was wise to summon the treasurer at such a late hour. But Lord Ian's sharp tone made it clear that there was nothing wrong with calling upon his own subordinate when he deemed it necessary. Without waiting for further discussion, he turned his attention to the blood-stained knife on the table, exhaling slightly as he looked down at his hand, checking to see if the wound was still fresh. Surprisingly, his skin remained intact, yet he clearly remembered the pain and the sensation of the blade cutting through. A peculiar thought crossed his mind. His teleportation ability hadn't been intentional, and the fact that his body had somehow healed itself left him deeply unsettled. There were too many unanswered questions, and while his instincts told him to investigate further, he decided to put the matter aside for now, knowing that his immediate focus needed to remain on the current situation. Slamming his fist onto the table, he gritted his teeth in frustration, anger rising as he thought about how the knights from Haha had dared to wound him within his own territory, an act that was beyond disrespectful. Trying to make the most out of the situation, he pondered aloud whether Lord Bonin would consider reducing the debt if he could prove that he had been attacked without provocation. As his eyes drifted to his injured hand, he considered another dilemma. Was it appropriate to wake Linda and ask her to treat his wound, or would that be an unnecessary bother? Meanwhile, at Tommen's mansion, the fat man was indulging in his usual luxuries, enjoying the comforts of life without a care in the world. However, his peace was abruptly shattered when he received the urgent summons from the castle. His face contorted in annoyance as he muttered complaints under his breath, cursing the boy who had the audacity to disturb him at such an inconvenient hour. He grumbled to himself, lamenting that the only reason he had kept the young lord alive was because he was useful. But if that usefulness ever came to an end, he would not hesitate to sever his head without a second thought. With heavy reluctance, he climbed into a carriage, which promptly set off toward the castle under the shroud of night. Upon his arrival, the butler greeted him with urgency, instructing him to hurry, as the lord did not take kindly to being kept waiting. Huffing and panting, Tallman was forced to pick up his pace, each hurried step causing beads of sweat to form along his forehead. In his mind, he cursed the entire ordeal, barely able to contain his resentment as he struggled to climb the long flight of stairs leading to the lord's chamber. By the time he reached the top, he felt as though he had lost several kilos just from the exertion, and his thoughts were filled with nothing but irritation and the burning desire to rid himself of the boy once and for all. As he entered the room, he quickly composed himself, performing a formal reverence before standing before his lord, masking his frustration with a forced expression of politeness. Lord Ian, seated with an air of casual authority, gestured for him to take a seat, remarking that he had been about to sleep but found himself unable to rest due to a matter that had been weighing heavily on his mind. Without further delay, he posed the question, what exactly was the size of his father's debt? Toman's expression twitched slightly at the inquiry, as if trying to suppress his irritation. He asked if this was truly the reason he had been summoned at such an hour, to which Lord Ian replied that it was essential information, as he needed to make plans accordingly. With a sigh, Tallman pulled out a small notebook, flipping through its pages before answering the total debt amounted to over 400,000 gold coins. Hearing this, Lord Ian's mind immediately went to the wages of his soldiers, recalling that an average soldier received only about 2 gold coins as payment. A dark realization set in, and he narrowed his eyes as he did a quick mental calculation. His expression turned sharp, his voice dangerously calm as he pointed out an inconsistency over the course of 3 years. They had only managed to pay 50,000 gold coins toward the debt, a fraction of what was owed. Tallman's face turned pale, his usual composure slipping as he scrambled for an explanation. He hastily claimed that they had done everything possible to meet even that amount, including cutting back on basic expenses to ensure that some payment could be made. But Lord Ian was far from satisfied. He pressed further, demanding to know the sources of income for the territory. Tallman responded that the primary sources were taxation from over 172 villages, contributions from merchants, and revenue from the mines. However, even with all of these income streams, only about 20,000 gold coins remained at the end of each year. Lord Ian leaned back slightly, his mind racing with thoughts. None of this added up. If this was truly the case, then the debt would remain unpaid for decades. An outcome that made no sense for a lord who was expected to manage his land efficiently. Tallman, sensing the growing tension, attempted to shift the conversation and make an exit. But Lord Ian was not finished. Before he could escape, the young lord demanded to know the reason behind his father's financial ruin. Tallman hesitated, his expression betraying a flicker of unease before he carefully asked if his lord's memories had returned. Lord Ian, maintaining a neutral expression, denied it, stating that the man had informed him about the debt. With a sigh, Tallman finally provided an answer. Every year, Lord Bonin hosted a grand deer hunt, an event meant to strengthen connections between noble families, but also a gathering where high-stakes betting took place. In short, the debt had accumulated as a result of excessive gambling. Hearing this, Lord Ian felt an overwhelming sense of disappointment toward his so-called father, realizing that the financial ruin of his land was not due to war or hardship, but rather to reckless indulgence in a vice. Despite the frustration building within him, he composed himself, asking if anyone had ever bothered to stop him. Tallman's next words made his blood run cold. The man smirked, revealing that the boy himself had been present at these events. The shock was so great that Lord Ian, in the middle of taking a sip of wine, nearly choked, coughing as he reached for a cloth to wipe his mouth. Struggling to process the revelation, he exhaled before posing another question. Was there any way to pay off the debt faster? Tallman wasted no time in providing an answer, suggesting that they sell the mines and double the taxes imposed on the citizens. If they did this, he claimed, the debt could be paid off within a few years. Lord Ian's expression darkened at the suggestion, his irritation clear as he stated that such a course of action would bring no long-term benefit, only short-term relief at the cost of his people's suffering. Growing agitated, Tallman insisted that they needed to focus on the present, warning that the longer they waited, the more the debt would grow. However, Lord Ian could see through his intentions. Choosing not to push further, he shifted the topic, knowing that continuing the discussion would be futile. Tallman, sensing an opportunity to leave, urged his lord not to overthink the situation and to simply sell the mines, but Lord Ian refused, saying they could revisit the matter at a later time. Smiling, Tallman agreed, but before he could rise, he posed one final question. Was the Lord planning to double the taxes on his citizens? Swirling the wine in his glass, Lord Ian smirked, tilting his head slightly before delivering a sharp response. It would be much easier to simply cut Toman's salary in half. The reaction was immediate. Toman's face drained of color, his panic visible, as the realization of his lord's growing awareness began to sink in. The protagonist leaned back slightly, swirling the remaining wine in his glass before stating that even Toman, who had no issue suggesting tax hikes on the common people, would certainly not be pleased if his own wealth were cut in half. If he, as the treasurer, would be unhappy with such an outcome, then why should the citizens bear the burden of even higher taxes? Despite this logic, Toman continued to push his argument, trying to persuade the young lord to reconsider, insisting that increasing taxes was the best way to reduce the debt as quickly as possible. However, Lord Ian, already at the limit of his patience, slammed his glass down onto the table with enough force to send a sharp echo through the room. Glaring at Toman with clear irritation before ordering him to find another solution, one that didn't involve further oppressing his people. Toman gritted his teeth but had no choice but to comply, though his frustration was evident. Complaining under his breath, he argued that balancing the kingdom's finances was not so simple, yet Lord Ian cut him off sharply, warning him that if he continued to fail in his duties, he would simply replace him with someone more competent. The weight of that threat settled heavily in the air, and for the first time in their conversation, the color drained slightly from Toman's face. In his mind, the treasurer was barely holding back his rage, feeling as though he had endured enough of the boy's newfound arrogance, but outwardly, he forced himself to maintain his composure. Noticing the change in his expression, Lord Ian tilted his head and questioned why Toman looked so grim all of a sudden. Caught off guard, Toman immediately apologized, bowing slightly before returning to his seat, his voice more restrained than before as he begrudgingly accepted the command. Lord Ian gave him one last order before dismissing him by tomorrow. He expected a new plan to be presented. Without another word, Toman left the room, his footsteps heavy with resentment, and as soon as he was out of sight, he clenched his fists in a silent fury. Grinding his teeth, he muttered to himself that the young lord would regret this treatment, swearing that he would make him pay. After such a turbulent night, Lord Ian finally allowed himself to rest, laying down at his desk, exhausted from the events of the day. However, his respite was brief. A sudden shift in the atmosphere made his skin prickle, his instincts flaring in alarm as an eerie, dark glow began emanating from the knife resting on the table. The unnatural energy jolted him awake, his heart racing as he immediately pushed himself upright, eyes darting around the dimly lit room. A heavy presence filled the air, and a sudden certainty gripped him he was not alone. Reacting on impulse, he moved toward the knife, reaching for it, but before he could grasp it, his breath caught in his throat as something unexpected happened. Across the blade, a pair of glowing red eyes flickered into existence, and from the shadows surrounding the weapon, a mysterious figure began to emerge. The entity, shrouded in darkness, gazed at him with an expression of mild amusement before speaking in a voice that carried an eerie calmness, asking if he could see her. Already on edge, Lord Ian exhaled in frustration, rubbing his temple before muttering that he couldn't even have a single day of peace. As if dealing with debt, political corruption, and an assassination-riddled history wasn't enough, now he had to contend with what appeared to be a ghost haunting his weapon. Memories of his past life flickered briefly in his mind. 10 years ago, Earth had faced an unprecedented event, an invasion by beings from another world, which had rewritten the very fabric of human civilization. At the time, he had joined the military, dedicating himself to fighting against the biological weapons unleashed by those creatures. When the opportunity arose to invade their stronghold, he had taken it. But in the end, a malfunctioning teleportation device had sent him spiraling into an unknown fate. That single moment had changed everything. Now he found himself in a world where magic existed, inhabiting the body of a sickly noble, and just recently, he had experienced an accidental teleportation during combat. An occurrence that suggested there was more to his arrival in this world than mere coincidence. If that wasn't enough to make his head spin, a ghost had now materialized before him, claiming to have been trapped inside his dagger for years. Still unnerved, he asked the man, who had entered the room in response to his sudden movements, if he could see the shadowy figure. However, the man, after glancing around in confusion, asked if he was referring to the dagger itself. That was all Lord Ian needed to confirm that no one else could perceive the entity before him. The ghost, sensing his realization, explained that she had been imprisoned within the weapon by a mage long ago, and, until now, no human had ever been able to see her. The man, sensing something strange in the room but unable to pinpoint it, cautiously asked if he should call for the doctor. However, Lord Ian waved him off, declaring that he was simply going to rest, and that there was no need for unnecessary panic. The shadowy entity, however, was not finished. She revealed that she had been observing him for some time, her interest piqued by the fact that he had entered the body of the Lord. Without missing a beat, she introduced herself as Blenzer, claiming that she had once been the greatest swordsman of the nation. Despite his exhaustion, Lord Ian found himself intrigued. He quickly pressed her for more information, asking if she knew the reason he had been summoned to this world, but Blenzer, much to his disappointment, admitted that she did not. However, she confirmed that she had witnessed his teleportation, further solidifying the fact that she had been present for key moments in his journey. Still dissatisfied with the lack of concrete answers, Lord Ian asked if she had any knowledge regarding the strange events surrounding him, but once again, Blenzer claimed ignorance. Letting out an exasperated sigh, he laid back down, deciding that if she had no real answers, then there was no point in prolonging the conversation. He asked her to let him rest, as nothing she had said so far seemed particularly important. However, Blenzer was insistent. She urged him to listen, and after a brief moment of hesitation, Lord Ian relented, begrudgingly asking what exactly she wanted. The ghostly swordsman wasted no time in revealing her purpose. Despite being trapped within the dagger, she still had a mission to complete, one that had been assigned to her by the former emperor. She explained that she had been given 2 tasks. The first was to assassinate a dark mage named Hakro Bemen, and the second was to retrieve the dragon's eye. Curious, Lord Ian asked about the dragon's eye, seeking clarification on what exactly had been stolen. Blenzer explained that it was an artifact tied to an ancient dragon that had long since disappeared, though a portion of its power had been sealed within the dagger. The emperor, who had sought to imprison its power, had perished long ago, and with his empire having fallen, the responsibility of ensuring the artifact did not fall into human hands had been left to her. Hearing this, Lord Ian questioned whether she had any idea where the dragon's eye might be, to which Blenzer responded that it was likely buried alongside the dark mage, his body resting in the territory of Haha. While Lord Ian briefly considered the implications, he ultimately concluded that such a task was too risky and dismissed it outright, telling Blenzer to forget about it. However, Blenzer was quick to make an offer. If Lord Ian agreed to help her complete her mission, she would teach him the Emperor's sword art, a technique that, if mastered, would make him the greatest swordsman on earth. Honest to his own nature, Lord Ian immediately declined, stating that he had no interest in mastering the sword. As a lord, he had the luxury of relying on others to fight for him. Besides, he already had the strongest swordsman in the kingdom as his subordinate. At this, Blenzer's expression darkened, her voice sharp with irritation as she demanded to know who dared hold such a title. With a smirk, Lord Ian casually answered Charlene. Blenzer's voice was steady, but his words carried a heavy weight as he issued a chilling warning Charlene dear. The man Lord Ian had just praised as the strongest swordsman in the kingdom was the very one responsible for assassinating the former lord. Elsewhere, Charlene stood amidst a battlefield littered with corpses, his expression unreadable as he surveyed the lifeless bodies of those who had been caught in the conflict. Blood stained the ground in every direction, the stench of death heavy in the air. A woman approached him, her voice steady yet laced with tension, addressing him as chief before relaying grim news. The bandits had shown no mercy, slaughtering every last hostage, men, women, and the elderly alike. Not a single one had been spared, and to make matters worse, the perpetrators had managed to escape, disappearing into the neighboring territory of Lalan. She suggested that they return to the castle, warning that further pursuit could lead to unnecessary conflict with another region. However, Charlene did not seem pleased with this idea. He did not respond immediately, instead turning toward his horse and mounting it in one swift motion. His mind had already been made up. They would not retreat. They would hunt down the bandits and eliminate them, ensuring that the world understood what fate awaited those who dared to cross Alberon. Meanwhile, deep within Lalan's borders, the bandits who had fled were celebrating their escape, their leader grinning as he confidently declared that the knights would never follow them into another lord's territory. One of his subordinates, still catching his breath from the escape, agreed, stating that an invasion of Lalan would prompt immediate retaliation, and the knights would be foolish to risk a war. The leader scoffed, laughing as he claimed that Charlene would have to be an absolute fool to step foot in this land. Unfortunately for them, Charlene was exactly the kind of man who disregarded such threats. At that very moment, he arrived at the scene, leading his cavalry straight into Lalan's territory without a shred of hesitation. His men rode at full speed, their presence striking fear into the hearts of the bandits who had assumed themselves safe. The moment the bandit leader caught sight of the approaching force, his expression twisted in shock. He had not expected this level of recklessness. Panic set in, and orders were hastily shouted. The archers scrambled to position themselves, their bows drawn as they prepared to unleash a barrage of arrows. At the woman's command, the projectiles rained down toward the approaching cavalry, the whistling sound slicing through the air. But Charlene did not falter. Drawing his sword, he moved with lethal precision, cutting down arrow after arrow with ease. His soldiers, fueled by their commander's fearlessness, stormed forward, cutting through the enemy ranks with terrifying efficiency. One by one, the bandits fell, calling out desperately for their leader, but he could do nothing to stop the carnage. His fear was evident as he gritted his teeth, cursing Charlene for his audacity, before declaring that he would be the first to cut him down. But before he could act, Charlene moved first. With a single devastating kick to his shield, the sheer force sent the bandit leader crashing to the ground. The fight was over before it had truly begun. The man struggled, but Charlene did not give him the chance to stand. His boot pressed down hard, keeping him pinned as chaos unfolded around them. Alberon's soldiers dominated the battlefield, executing the remaining bandits with ruthless efficiency. Charlene's voice was calm but deadly as he questioned why the scum before him had chosen to murder innocent hostages. The bandit leader, despite his predicament, let out a dry, defiant laugh. He spat on the ground before replying that he wasn't some cowardly rat. He would do whatever it took to remain in power, regardless of who had to die. For a brief moment, Charlene said nothing, merely observing the man beneath his boot with cold calculation. Then, without hesitation, he drove his sword straight through the bandit's chest, his voice unwavering as he stated that those who lived by such ruthless ambition would die the same way. As the blood pooled beneath him, Charlene withdrew his blade, wiping it clean as he muttered that he too had a reputation to uphold. Back at the protagonist's castle, the morning sun had barely risen when Lord Ian found himself sitting beside Linda, diligently practicing the written language of the land. His handwriting, though still rough, had improved, and after finishing his latest attempt, he handed the paper over to her, waiting for her evaluation. Linda, inspecting his work, smiled before teasingly asking if he would be able to properly pronounce all 32 letters by the next lesson. Ever quick-witted, Lord Ian turned the conversation in his favor, leaning in slightly as he asked if she would reward him for succeeding. After all, he argued, students needed motivation to give their best effort. Linda, caught off guard, hesitated for a moment before admitting that she wasn't sure what would please him. Without missing a beat, Lord Ian casually suggested that she grant him a single wish, something small yet meaningful, if he managed to meet her expectations. Though initially wary, Linda eventually agreed, reasoning that it was a fair trade since he was working so hard to make Alberon a better place. Pleased by her response, Lord Ian's eyes gleamed as he sealed it with a promise. For some reason, Linda let out a small sigh, as though relieved, before confessing that she had feared her lord would turn into an entirely different person after waking from his coma. But now, she was glad to see that he had remained the same adorable in his own way. Hearing this, Lord Ian was momentarily stunned, warmth spreading through him at the unexpected praise. Though she quickly excused herself, mentioning that she had a patient to attend to, the words lingered in his mind long after she had gone. As she left, he absent-mindedly called after her, telling her to take care. A quiet moment followed, during which Lord Ian found himself lost in thought. He had to admit he was smitten, but as his heart raced at the thought, he found himself wondering if Linda shared any of the same feelings. Before he could entertain the idea any further, a dark presence loomed behind him. A sharp chill ran down his spine as he turned, his body instantly tensing in alarm. Without warning, Charlene stood before him, his gaze devoid of mercy, his murderous aura suffocating. Before Lord Ian could react, the blade flashed. A searing pain ripped through his body as blood sprayed across the room, his vision blurred, his mind failing to register what had just happened. Then blackness, a sharp breath escaped him as his eyes flew open. His heart pounded violently against his chest as he found himself staring at Linda, who was looking at him with concern. Realizing that everything Charlene's presence, the attack, the conversation with Linda had been nothing but a dream, Lord Ian exhaled heavily, running a hand through his hair to calm himself. Linda, oblivious to his inner turmoil, simply asked if he had slept well. Still shaken, Lord Ian muttered that he had gone to bed late the night before. Linda, scolding him gently, told him that he needed to maintain a healthy routine, warning that wandering around after already being injured was not wise. Brushing aside the lingering unease, Lord Ian changed the topic, saying that he had a question for her. Encouraging him to ask anything, Linda listened as he hesitated briefly before asking whether the people of Alberon actually liked him. Her expression faltered slightly, confusion flickering in her eyes, but before she could respond, Lord Ian clarified that he needed to understand the true state of his territory. Even before she answered, he could already sense the truth from her face alone. With an apologetic look, Linda admitted that the people suffered under constant tax increases, and those who couldn't pay were enslaved. Lord Ian felt his blood run cold. his hands clenched into fists as the weight of her words crashed down on him. He had not known. He had been kept in the dark. His people, his citizens, had been suffering, not just from mismanagement, but from outright cruelty. Though Linda tried to reassure him, telling him that the blame lay with Toman and Nose, not him, Lord Ian could not shake the overwhelming frustration that consumed him. Because at the end of the day, it didn't matter who had issued the orders. It was still his rule that had allowed it to happen. The weight of the truth bore down on the protagonist like an iron shackle, his mind racing with the implications of what Linda had just told him. So many people had been forced into slavery, their lives reduced to nothing more than tools for repaying a debt that never seemed to shrink. His hands clenched into fists as anger and frustration bubbled within him, yet before he could allow himself to fully erupt, Linda gently placed her hand over his, her expression filled with concern. She urged him not to blame himself, reminding him that at the time his father was killed, he had been left completely alone with no one to guide or support him. Her words struck a nerve, and for a moment, Lord Ian struggled to suppress his emotions. But then, as if unable to contain his outrage any longer, he raised his voice, demanding to know how the debt had still not been paid despite the excessive taxes that had burdened the citizens for years. However, as soon as the words left his mouth, he noticed the slight flinch in Linda's posture and realized how insensitive he must have sounded. Taking a deep breath, he forced himself to calm down, lowering his tone as he continued the conversation. He mentioned that last night Toman had suggested doubling the taxes as a means to pay off the debt faster. But before he could even finish his sentence, Linda immediately spoke up, her voice laced with urgency, pleading with him not to do such a thing. A small smirk tugged at the corner of Lord Ian's lips as he reassured her that he had already rejected the idea, though the mere suggestion itself had been enough to infuriate him. After a brief pause, he asked what happened to those who failed to pay their taxes, already dreading the answer. Linda hesitated for a moment before explaining that those unable to meet their payments were sent to work in the mines, where conditions were harsh and food was scarce. Many perished due to the grueling labor and starvation, their bodies never even receiving proper burials. Hearing this, Lord Ian's anger only grew, but his resolve hardened as well. He clenched his jaw, exhaling slowly before muttering that in comparison to everything else, the debt was nothing more than a small detail. Looking back at Linda, he thanked her for being honest with him, though he still had a few more questions left to ask. This time, his curiosity shifted to Charlene Deer, the security captain. He asked what kind of person he was, hoping to gain a better understanding of the man who held such an esteemed position. However, instead of answering directly, Linda's expression turned melancholic as she gave a rather basic response, describing him as someone who was diligent in his duties and always loyal to his work. This vague answer did little to satisfy Lord Ian's curiosity, and he quickly pressed further, asking why she looked so sad when speaking about the captain. After a brief pause, Linda finally admitted the reason: her pity for him. Though Charlene was a formidable warrior, he did not involve himself in political affairs, which meant he had been powerless to protect Lord Ian from the corruption of Toman and Nose. For the third time, Lord Ian thanked her, acknowledging that her honesty had allowed him to gain a much clearer perspective of the situation than before. Just like in his dream, Linda soon excused herself, stating that she had a patient to attend to. As she left, Lord Ian absent-mindedly told her to take care, his mind still replaying their conversation. Now alone, he turned his attention to the ghostly presence lingering near him. Speaking directly to Blenzer, he brought up the revelation that Charlene had been the one to assassinate the former lord, demanding an explanation. However, Blenzer simply shrugged, stating that she didn't know the details, she only knew what she had witnessed. Annoyed by the lack of useful information, Lord Ian sighed in exasperation, questioning what purpose Blenzer even served if she could not provide him with answers. The ghost, unbothered by his frustration, simply responded that she could teach him the Emperor's swordsmanship. Without waiting for a response, she raised her hand and, with complete confidence, told him to forget about the territory entirely, suggesting that he retreat to the mountains for 30 years to train. If he did so, he would gain enough power to become emperor himself, and countless strong subordinates would serve under him. Scoffing, Lord Ian leaned back, resting his head against the chair as he muttered that being a lord was already difficult enough without the absurd idea of isolating himself for 3 decades. However, Blenzer was insistent. She warned that in the future, insurgencies could arise, and without strength, Lord Ian would be powerless to defend himself. He would be left with nothing but regret, wishing he had taken the opportunity to train while he still could. Chuckling, Lord Ian dismissed the notion, claiming that such a thing was useless. He saw through Blenzer's reasoning and pointed out that what she truly feared was failing to destroy the dragon's eye. Immediately, the ghost's demeanor shifted, her voice rising in frustration as she insisted that it was for his own good. that he was misunderstanding her intentions. Amused, Lord Ian teased her, asking if she was perhaps some kind of sunbear or overly protective guardian. Annoyed by his light-hearted response, Blenzer sternly told him to stop joking around. Still grinning, Lord Ian admitted that even if he wanted to learn swordsmanship, he had no way of knowing how powerful the Emperor's techniques truly were. He then revealed something about himself during his past life. He had spent 10 years fighting for his survival. With that experience, he should at least be capable of defending himself. Intrigued, Blenzer emerged fully from the dagger, finally stepping into view. The moment Lord Ian got a good look at her, his eyes widened slightly in surprise. Blenzer, the entity he had assumed was male, was in fact a woman. She must have noticed his reaction because she sighed, muttering that no matter how many centuries passed, people's reactions remained the same. However, she did not linger on the subject for long. Returning to the matter at hand, she once again asked to see Lord Ian's combat abilities. As she recalled his earlier teleportation, she became particularly curious about how he had achieved it, urging him to attempt it once more. Lord Ian thought carefully about the previous instances where he had teleported. The first time, he had been focusing on the soldiers, and the next thing he knew, he had ended up in a different location. The second time, he had seen the man and had suddenly appeared behind him. Reflecting on this, a realization dawned upon him. Perhaps his teleportation was tied to where his vision was focused. Blenzer, considering the theory, suggested that they test it. Without warning, she moved toward the window and passed through it effortlessly, descending toward the ground below. Lord Ian, reacting quickly, ran forward and threw open the window, spotting her figure standing below. She instructed him to concentrate his vision, directing his thoughts toward the goal of reaching her. Focusing hard, Lord Ian felt a familiar sensation washing over him. A green aura, identical to the one from before, enveloped his body. Within a split second, he disappeared from the room, reappearing directly in front of Blenzer. She observed him with intrigue, remarking that his ability was truly fascinating. In the past, there had been mages who could perform similar feats, but none could do so instantaneously as he had. Without giving him a chance to rest, she raised her hand. A black sword materialized within her grasp, its dark aura exuding an overwhelming presence. With a terrifying expression, she took a combat stance and, without warning, commanded him to defend himself. In a fraction of a second, her sword flashed forward, striking with relentless speed. Lord Ian barely had time to react. He could feel the weight of her attacks, the sheer force behind each strike sending sharp waves of pressure throughout the air. His mind screamed at him. Dodging was his only option because in that moment, defending was completely impossible. The pressure in the air was thick as the weight of Lord Ian's declaration settled over the gathered nobles. The decision to cut taxes in half had already spread across the city, and the sheer volume of cheers and celebration echoed in the background, contrasting sharply with the silent fury on Toman's face. Though the man remained composed, the slight twitch of his fingers betrayed his inner turmoil. This was not how things were supposed to go. The young lord, who had always been nothing more than a sickly puppet, had suddenly taken control, unraveling the foundation of their carefully crafted schemes. Stepping down from the carriage, Lord Ian carried himself with unwavering confidence, acknowledging the crowd before shifting his attention to the nobles who had finally left the comforts of their homes to witness the spectacle firsthand. His presence alone sent a ripple of unease through them, as they were unaccustomed to seeing him outside the castle, let alone issuing commands of such magnitude. His gaze, sharp and calculating, swept over the area before he finally proceeded into the government building, his strides deliberate as he absorbed his surroundings. Inside, the structure was well kept, as expected of a place that controlled the kingdom's finances. However, as he moved through the halls, he took note of the contrast in upkeep compared to areas under common use. The luxuries afforded to those in power were evident, but his attention soon landed on something unexpected: a door, tucked away in a quieter part of the building. Without hesitation, he pushed it open. A sprawling garden stretched before him, far more refined than the one back at the castle. The air carried the soft fragrance of blooming flowers, the vibrant array of colors standing in stark contrast to the harsh discussions taking place elsewhere. The sight was enough to momentarily pull him from the intensity of the situation, and he found himself acknowledging the care put into maintaining such a beautiful space. The realization that this garden had existed for a long time, untouched by noble interference, piqued his curiosity, though his moment of admiration was brief. Recollecting the purpose of his visit, he turned his focus back to the matter at hand. The taxation issue was the most pressing concern, and now that he had forced a public declaration, he had no intention of letting it be dismissed. The wealth of the kingdom had long been built on the backs of its people, yet their suffering had only worsened. The mines had become graveyards for those who could not meet the oppressive demands, and still the supposed financial burden of the debt remained unchanged. The numbers did not add up. With his mind set, he issued the command that the taxes were to be reverted to their previous state across every city. The weight of his words was undeniable, and the nobles, long accustomed to having full control over financial affairs, were visibly shaken. For years they had dictated the policies without resistance, yet now, the very lord they had underestimated was unraveling their power. The immediate response was one of disbelief, followed by an attempt to push back against the decision. Arguments were raised, citing the urgency of repaying the debt, yet Lord Ian countered with an undeniable truth: the tax increases had done nothing to alleviate the financial strain. If anything, the debt had remained stagnant, and with the suffering of the people worsening, it was evident that something was being tampered with behind the scenes. The growing tension between them was undeniable. Though Lord Ian did not directly accuse Tommen, his implications were clear. The long-standing control over the finances was slipping, and with the sudden shift in authority, the treasurer was left scrambling for a response. The room, once filled with the quiet confidence of noblemen who dictated the fate of others without consequence, now held an undercurrent of unease. Despite the resistance, Lord Ian remained unwavering. The decision had been made, and no amount of persuasion would alter it. He had no intention of allowing the suffering of his people to continue in the name of a debt that had long been manipulated by unseen hands. While the nobles had spent years indulging in excess, the common folk had been crushed under an unbearable weight. That was no longer something he would allow to persist. Though the discussion eventually came to an end, the implications of his actions lingered. The nobles may have feigned acceptance for now, but Lord Ian knew that this was merely the beginning of their resistance. The control they once held would not be surrendered so easily, and the shift in power had set the stage for inevitable retaliation. As he left the government building, the distant cheers of the townspeople still echoed through the city, their joy a stark contrast to the silent fury brewing in the minds of those who had just been stripped of their grip over the kingdom's wealth. Tommen, whose expression remained composed, watched the young lord with a calculating gaze, already formulating his next move. The game had changed, but the pieces were far from settled. Tommen, despite the protagonist's direct order, stubbornly attempted to keep the excessive tax rates in place. However, Lord Ian, ever perceptive, quickly caught on to the treasurer's defiance and wasted no time in calling him out, questioning whether he was outright disregarding his command. Tommen, unwilling to lose his grip on the kingdom's finances, countered by claiming that the high taxes had originally been approved by the lord himself, and due to his memory loss, he might simply be struggling to make rational decisions. The attempt to manipulate the situation did not go unnoticed. Lord Ian, maintaining his composure, shifted his attention to Nose and asked whether he agreed with Tommen's assessment. Nose, ever cautious, simply responded that he would follow the orders of his lord. Lord Ian smirked at the response, acknowledging that Nose at the very least understood the weight of authority. Meanwhile, Tommen, growing more agitated, shouted that he was the one responsible for managing the finances, and that his judgment should not be ignored. Unbothered by the treasurer's complaints, Lord Ian made his decision clear: he was tired and would be returning to the castle. He turned toward the carriage, but before stepping inside, he issued a final command, instructing Nose to convince Tommen at all costs. Without waiting for a response, he entered the carriage, but just before departing, he casually called out to the fat man, hinting that they might see each other again before the day was over. Tommen, barely containing his rage, forced a diplomatic response, assuring his lord that he could summon him at any time. As the carriage rolled away, Tommen's facade crumbled, his face twisting in fury as he cursed the boy under his breath. Far from the heated exchange, Lord Ian exhaled deeply, allowing himself a brief moment of relief. However, Blenzer wasted no time in questioning him about his next course of action. The ghostly swordswoman asked what he intended to do with Tommen, to which Lord Ian, with a determined glint in his eyes, stated that he planned to teach the man a lesson. The treasurer had played the fool for far too long, robbing him openly while pretending to be nothing more than a loyal servant. That was something Lord Ian could no longer tolerate. Blenzer, ever the opportunist, took the opportunity to tease him, pointing out that it was Lord Ian himself who had allowed the situation to escalate this far. Though her words irritated him, he didn't deny them. He had not created these problems intentionally, but now that he had inherited them, he would be the one to fix them. With that thought in mind, he dismissed the conversation, stating that he would need rest before carrying out his plans for the night. Meanwhile, back at Tommen's estate, chaos had erupted. The once pristine garden had been utterly destroyed, its plants trampled and cut down as Tommen, in a fit of rage, swung a sword wildly. cursing Lord Ian's name and wishing for his death. His outburst had left behind a scene of utter devastation, years of meticulous care undone in mere moments. Nose, ever the observer, calmly pointed out the damage, remarking that over 100 years' worth of care had been destroyed in a single evening. However, his words did little to soothe Toman's fury. Instead, the treasurer snapped, demanding to know why Nose seemed to be sympathizing with the Lord. Nose, unfazed, responded that he wasn't necessarily taking sides, but even the village chiefs had begun voicing their grievances over the increasingly oppressive taxes. Their frustration was reaching a boiling point, and it would be unwise to ignore it. Toman scoffed at the notion, making it clear that he had no regard for the so-called wretches who lived under his rule. If a rebellion were to break out, he saw only one solution: kill them all. Nose, ever the voice of moderation, advised him to exercise caution, warning that excessive cruelty would only lead to greater problems. Despite the words of warning, Toman remained steadfast in his defiance. He had no intention of submitting to Lord Ian's rule, nor would he lower the tax rate just because of the boy's naive ideals. However, Nose, seeing the path ahead more clearly than his companion, issued a final warning. If Lord Ian decided to use the captain of the guard, Charlene, to enforce his authority, Toman would not be able to resist. That statement sent a visible shudder through the treasurer. His previously unshakable confidence faltered for a brief moment, sweat forming along his brow as he processed the possibility. Desperate to regain control of the situation, he declared that if given the chance, he would whip the young lord to death himself. As the night deepened, an old man wandered the roads of Albaran, his steps slow and unsteady from intoxication. However, as he stumbled forward, something strange caught his eye. A figure human in shape seemed to flicker in and out of existence, vanishing and reappearing as if reality itself was bending. Before he could process what was happening, the figure materialized directly behind him. The person in question was Lord Ian. For hours, he had been honing his teleportation abilities, testing the limits of his power by traveling back and forth across the village. The old man, utterly baffled by the sight, could only watch in confusion as the boy disappeared and reappeared in the blink of an eye. At one point, Lord Ian materialized atop a nearby house, grinning to himself as he marveled at his own progress. Blenzor, observing from within the dagger, let out an exasperated sigh. The boy, despite possessing such a rare and powerful ability, was using it like a child playing with a new toy. Ignoring her complaints, Lord Ian set his sights on his true destination, Toman's estate. With a single thought, he teleported directly onto the roof of the mansion, his gaze scanning the surroundings. Something was immediately off. The place felt far too quiet, and upon closer inspection, he noticed that the guards stationed outside wore different armor than those under his command. Blenzor, watching closely, confirmed his suspicions the men were mercenaries. That realization caused Lord Ian's expression to darken. If Toman had replaced his own soldiers with hired men, it meant he was preparing for something beyond simple defiance. The ghostly swordswoman, sensing his unease, suggested that they proceed with caution. However, when Lord Ian ordered her to investigate further, she grumbled in annoyance. As much as she hated to admit it, her presence was bound to the dagger, limiting how far she could stray from him. Instead, she advised that he remain close and watch for any further signs of foul play. Inside the mansion, Toman sat at his dining table, indulging himself in an extravagant meal, his anger from earlier replaced by his usual indulgent nature. As he ate, his butler approached, informing him that a maid from the castle had arrived. Without hesitation, Toman instructed that she be brought in. The young woman, clearly uncomfortable in the lavish surroundings, entered hesitantly. Toman wasted no time in getting to the point. Reaching into his coat, he produced a small vial, its contents unknown. Without an ounce of hesitation, he ordered the maid to take the vial and spread its contents onto the lord's bed. The girl's eyes widened in confusion. Though she had come expecting orders, she had not anticipated something so suspicious. And outside, perched upon the rooftop, Lord Ian listened carefully, his expression unreadable as he processed the treasurer's newest act of treachery. The maid's hands trembled as she stared at the small vial Toman had handed her, her stomach twisting with dread. When she hesitantly asked what was inside, the treasurer smirked, his response sending a cold shiver down her spine. Inside the vial were fleas contaminated with a deadly plague. Panic flared in her eyes as she stammered, knowing full well that if anything happened to the young lord, she would be the first to be blamed. She tried to protest, but Toman's expression hardened as he reminded her of her past, of how she had once been nothing more than a street thief before he had taken her in. He made it clear that if she refused, he would ensure she ended up right back where she started, or worse. Faced with no other choice, she nodded, her entire body trembling as she took the vial. Toman, his grin returning, assured her that if she carried out the task properly, he would remove her from the castle and grant her freedom. With her fate hanging in the balance, she turned and left, her steps slow and uncertain. Unbeknownst to Tommen, Blenzor had witnessed the entire exchange. The ghostly swordswoman wasted no time returning to Lord Ian, who remained perched atop the roof, watching the estate below with careful eyes. Upon her arrival, he casually asked how her little mission had gone, prompting Blenzor to scoff at his relaxed demeanor. However, her expression quickly turned serious as she relayed everything she had just seen. Hearing Tommen's plot, Lord Ian's amusement disappeared in an instant. His body tensed as he processed the treasurer's sheer audacity. This man was willing to poison his own lord just to maintain control. That was the final straw. With his course of action set, he asked Blenzor for details on the guards stationed around the mansion. She quickly reported that there were 9 in total, and that Tommen's room had no windows, making a direct entry difficult. However, that didn't matter. Lord Ian had already made up his mind he would infiltrate through the corridor. Descending swiftly from the roof, he landed near a window where 3 guards stood on patrol. Rather than engaging them directly, he simply ignored their presence and vanished in an instant. One of the guards, a pink-haired man, immediately sensed something was off and demanded an identity. However, before he could react further, Lord Ian reappeared in front of the 2 other guards, swiftly incapacitating them with precise strikes. The remaining soldier, gripping his sword tightly, swore that the intruder would not get past him. Unfazed, Lord Ian teleported behind him in a blink, but the guard was fast. He pivoted, counter-attacking with impressive speed. Dodging swiftly, Lord Ian noted that this one was far more skilled than the others. The man, undeterred, smirked, declaring that simple tricks wouldn't work on him. Blenzor chuckled from within the dagger, amused by the change in pace. For the first time, Lord Ian's usual confidence was being tested. A dark aura radiated from the guard as he shifted into a combat stance, his killing intent sharp and focused. Lord Ian remained still, observing carefully as his opponent prepared a final attack. But just as the man lunged forward, Lord Ian vanished from sight. Before the guard could react, Lord Ian materialized above him, locking his legs around his throat in a tight chokehold. With swift precision, he delivered a sharp blow to the side of the man's head, knocking him unconscious instantly. Blenzor, who had been watching intently, suddenly warned that more soldiers were approaching from the stairway. Wasting no time, Lord Ian moved toward the door, peeking inside just in time to see Tommen standing there, already armed with a sword. Without hesitation, Lord Ian teleported into the room, and before Tommen could even register what had happened, a single, well-placed strike sent him crashing to the floor, unconscious. The sound of footsteps thundered in the hallway as the guards arrived, but they were too late. By the time they entered the room, their lord was already gone. Lord Ian, smirking, had already vanished from the estate. Far from the mansion, near the edge of a tranquil lake, Lord Ian stood with Tommen's unconscious body slung over his shoulder. He let out an annoyed sigh, loudly questioning what on earth the fat man ate every day to be so unbearably heavy. Irritated, he unceremoniously dropped Tommen into the cold water below. The treasurer awoke with a start, gasping and flailing, as the freezing water sent a violent shock through his system. Panic set in immediately as he realized where he was, his mind racing to make sense of the situation. Lord Ian, standing at the edge of the lake, glared down at him. His voice was calm but firm as he reminded Tommen that he had been ordered multiple times to lower the taxes, yet he had continued to defy him. Still disoriented, Tommen sputtered, demanding to know what was happening. Lord Ian didn't bother explaining. Instead, he stepped forward and delivered a brutal punch directly to the treasurer's face. The force of the blow sent the man sprawling backward, his body half submerged in the lake. Coughing and groaning, Tommen barely had a second to recover before he instinctively grabbed a stone from the water and lunged forward, shouting that he would kill Lord Ian himself. Without even flinching, Lord Ian easily evaded the attack, effortlessly countering and immobilizing the struggling man. At that moment, Tommen's stomach twisted violently, and his dinner from earlier came rushing back up. While the treasurer retched, Lord Ian stood over him, shaking his head in mild disgust. There was no need for any further talk. He had already uncovered everything: Tommen's schemes, his betrayal, his greed. There was nothing left to discuss. A final punch landed squarely in Tommen's gut, knocking the wind out of him completely. Lord Ian pressed his foot down onto the man's head, forcing him beneath the water. As Tommen flailed helplessly, Lord Ian questioned him, demanding to know what had driven him to do all of this. Had his life been so dull that he sought excitement through corruption? Lowering the taxes had been such a simple request, yet he had chosen treachery over obedience. Moments before the treasurer lost consciousness, Lord Ian pulled him up, watching as the man gasped desperately for air. Finally broken, Tommen sobbed, begging for mercy. With shaking hands, he declared that he would serve Lord Ian loyally from now on, that he would be nothing but his obedient dog. Lord Ian, unimpressed, ignored his pleas. Pressing the edge of his dagger to Toman's throat, he calmly told him that if he missed his mark, the wound would hurt far more than an instant death. The terror in Toman's eyes was palpable. Desperate, the treasurer pleaded for one more chance, swearing that he would return everything he had stolen. Hearing this, Lord Ian let out a dry laugh. How bold of him to bargain using money that had never belonged to him in the first place. The weight of Toman's failure and humiliation pressed heavily upon him as he tried, with every bit of desperation, to insist that his actions had not been as malicious as they seemed, repeatedly begging for another chance. His voice hoarse with fear and desperation. Yet despite his pitiful state, Lord Ian remained unaffected, merely watching the treasurer with cold detachment before, after a long pause, deciding to grant him the mercy he sought not out of kindness, but because it served his purpose to keep the man alive, at least for now, ensuring that he would carry out the necessary reforms before he eventually outlived his usefulness. As Toman frantically assured that he would lower the taxes immediately, swearing his unwavering loyalty, Lord Ian took the opportunity to remind him of a few additional orders, making it explicitly clear that when announcing the reduction, the people must be made aware that it was their lord, and not Thaman himself, who had granted them this relief, ensuring that the credit for the act of mercy would be rightfully placed upon Lord Ian's shoulders rather than allowing the treasurer to manipulate the situation in his favor. Furthermore, he commanded that all individuals imprisoned in the mines due to their inability to pay the burdensome taxes be released without delay, their suffering no longer justified under the corrupt system that had long been enforced by Toman's greed. Watching the treasurer nod feverishly, his face still pale with lingering fear, Lord Ian turned his gaze toward the grand estate behind them, his eyes scanning the opulent structure with mild amusement as he took in its sheer extravagance, the fine craftsmanship, the pristine gardens, the sheer display of wealth, before remarking, in a tone laced with undeniable mockery, that the house was quite a lovely one though, given the circumstances. It was quite obvious that it had been built using money stolen from the very people who had been forced into destitution by Toman's greed, and because of this blatant act of corruption, Lord Ian declared, without hesitation, that from now on the house would belong to him instead, making it abundantly clear that Toman was to vacate the premises immediately, his time living in comfort and excess coming to an abrupt and humiliating end. Though Toman appeared on the verge of arguing, his survival instincts kicked in as he quickly masked his displeasure, forcing a strained, unconvincing smile as he assured his lord that he had no objections to the decision. However, Lord Ian, who had long since mastered the art of recognizing deception, studied his expression carefully before pointedly asking whether or not the man truly thought this was fair, watching as Toman, his body still trembling from his earlier beating, hurriedly denied any feelings of resentment, insisting that he would abide by whatever command was given to him, though the fear in his eyes betrayed the turmoil that raged within him. Satisfied, Lord Ian waved a dismissive hand, ordering the treasurer to disappear from his sight immediately, his patience having reached its limit, and though Toman hesitated for a brief moment, clearly struggling to accept his humiliating downfall, he ultimately turned and began his long, arduous journey back, his once proud demeanor reduced to that of a broken man, forced to walk miles without assistance, every step serving as a painful reminder of the power he had lost. And though his pride burned with resentment, he knew better than to voice his grievances, at least for the time being. Watching the treasurer's retreating figure, Lord Ian smirked slightly, knowing full well that the man's loyalty was as fragile as his resolve, and when Blenzor, ever the skeptic, questioned whether he truly trusted Toman to follow through with his promises, Lord Ian merely chuckled, his expression unreadable, before stating without hesitation that he did not trust him in the slightest. However, he had successfully instilled enough fear in the man that, at least for a while, Toman would remain obedient, too shaken by the events of the night to risk defying him again so soon. With his work finished, exhaustion crept into his bones, and rather than wasting any more time, he focused his energy, allowing his teleportation ability to activate as he vanished from the lake's edge, reappearing within the walls of the castle in a matter of seconds, finally allowing himself to succumb to the exhaustion of the night's events as he collapsed onto his bed, his mind already planning for the battles yet to come. The golden rays of the morning sun spilled through the grand windows of the castle, casting a warm glow upon the stone corridors as the quiet hum of daily life resumed within its walls. Yet even as the new day dawned, danger lurked in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. As a lone figure, her hands trembling with uncertainty, crept into the Lord's chambers, her breathing shallow as she cautiously approached his bed, carefully removing the small vial she had been given the night before, its contents swirling ominously as she hesitated, her conscience battling against the fear that gripped her chest. And though every fiber of her being screamed at her to abandon her task, the looming threat of Tolman's wrath forced her to press forward, her fingers slowly twisting the cap open. However, before she could proceed, a sudden weight fell upon her shoulder, the touch sending an immediate jolt of fear through her body as she turned, her wide eyes locking onto the very person she had been sent to harm Lord Ian himself, his sharp gaze unwavering as he studied her with an expression that, though calm, carried an unmistakable edge of authority, his presence alone enough to send her heart racing in sheer panic. Though she attempted to mask her intentions, hurriedly stammering that she had merely been tidying the room, Lord Ian remained unmoved, his tone firm as he instructed her to halt, making it clear that he already knew exactly what she had been planning. And though she tried to flee, desperate to escape his piercing stare, he swiftly stopped her once more, ordering her, without room for argument, to report any and all future commands issued by Tolman directly to him, his voice leaving no room for disobedience before finally instructing her to take the vial and throw it into the fire, ensuring that the treacherous plot would be reduced to ashes before it could ever be carried out. Still shaken, the maid rushed out of the room, nearly colliding with Linda in the corridor, though the healer merely glanced at her in mild curiosity before dismissing the interaction. Continuing on her way as she entered Lord Ian's chambers, placing a stack of books on the nearby table before directing a questioning look toward him, bringing up the rumor she had heard earlier that the Lord was planning to reduce taxes in the region of Karu. Yet rather than confirming only that, Lord Ian surprised her by stating, without hesitation, that the reduction would not be limited to a single region, but rather all cities under his rule, ensuring that the burden of excessive taxation would be lifted from every corner of his domain. A declaration that left Linda momentarily speechless as she processed the sheer scale of such a decision. Though she pointed out that such a drastic change would require permission from higher authorities, Lord Ian remained resolute, brushing off the concern with a simple yet powerful statement: he was the Lord of Albaran, and as such, his authority was the only one that mattered. As night fell upon the quiet village of Andira, Linda found herself standing before a desperate family, their sorrow evident as they pleaded for guidance regarding their ailing relative. A man whose leg had become so severely infected that amputation was the only means of saving his life. Yet despite her insistence that the operation was necessary, their reluctance remained firm. Their concerns centered not on his survival, but on how he would continue to live without his leg, their words laced with hesitation as they questioned whether prolonging his life at the cost of his mobility was truly the right choice. Frustration flickered in Linda's eyes as she snapped at them, her voice carrying the weight of her conviction, reminding them that there was no other option but to try, and with that, she moved swiftly, igniting a match and lighting a carefully prepared medicinal mixture, instructing the injured man to inhale the smoke in slow, steady breaths, ensuring that the numbing effect would ease his pain before the procedure. Yet, despite her efforts, the woman beside her scoffed, dismissing her actions as nothing more than an unnecessary burden, claiming that she had expected Linda to simply cure the man outright, not bring more suffering into their home, and when the patient himself, though weak, solemnly declared that he would rather die than become a burden to his family, Linda's heart clenched, a sinking realization washing over her as the door was slammed shut in her face, leaving her alone in the cold night air, helpless to change the fate that had already been decided. With each successive strike, Lord Ian's movements became sharper, faster, and more precise, his blade cutting through the air with an effortless fluidity that belied the weight of his exhaustion. His arms burned from the relentless repetition, his grip tightening against the hilt of his sword as beads of sweat rolled down his face, yet he refused to stop. Unwilling to surrender to fatigue, while he was still far from mastering the techniques required to become a true swordsman. Every swing carried purpose, every motion executed with a determination fueled by the knowledge that he had to grow stronger, that his current state of weakness was unacceptable in the face of the challenges ahead. Watching from the side, Blenzer observed his progress with an unreadable expression, her arms crossed as she remained silent, offering no praise nor encouragement, only the occasional reminder that his form still had flaws, that he had a long way to go before he could truly call himself skilled. As the training dragged on, Lord Ian finally exhaled sharply, his patience wearing thin, and with a sigh, he asked if they could move on to something else. However, Blenzer merely scoffed, unimpressed by his complaints, and with an air of complete indifference, informed him that he still had 700 more strikes to complete before she would even consider teaching him something new. She then added, almost mockingly, that when she had been 6 years old, she had performed 5,000 strikes per day without fail. The revelation left Lord Ian momentarily speechless, unable to fathom the sheer discipline and endurance required for such a feat, though the competitive fire within him flared at the thought of being outdone by a child. even if that child had once been Blenzer herself. Gritting his teeth, he forced himself back onto his feet, resolving to finish what he had started. Yet even as he resumed his training, his thoughts began to drift elsewhere. In his mind, the image of Linda surfaced, her kind yet determined gaze lingering in his memory, a quiet longing stirring within him, though he quickly pushed it aside, unwilling to allow distractions to cloud his focus. Meanwhile, within the village, Linda moved through the crowded streets, her mind heavy with concern for the patient she had treated the previous night. She wondered if he had survived, if he had been strong enough to endure despite the severity of his injury. Yet as she made her way toward his home, a loud commotion caught her attention. The unmistakable roar of an excited crowd echoed through the air, the clinking of exchanged coins and the shouts of eager spectators signaling that some sort of fight had broken out. Though she had no desire to involve herself in such matters, a strange sense of unease settled in her gut, compelling her to push forward, to weave through the throng of people until she reached the front. And when she finally caught sight of the scene before her, her heart nearly stopped. There, lying motionless on the ground, was the very man she had treated, his face bloodied, his body bruised, his breath shallow yet steady, a sight that should have been impossible. For the severity of his previous injury should have left him bedridden, barely clinging to life. And yet, there he was, not only alive, but fighting, moving with the strength and endurance of someone completely healed. Confusion and disbelief warred within her as she hurried to his side, her mind struggling to comprehend the impossibility of what she was seeing. Kneeling beside him, she assessed his wounds, taking in the fresh injuries from the fight before finally demanding an explanation. However, rather than concern or gratitude, the man merely smirked, his expression filled with amusement as he recognized her. With an air of nonchalance, he teased her, remarking that had he listened to her initial diagnosis, he would have spent the rest of his life crippled, a statement that only deepened her frustration. Ignoring his arrogance, she pressed forward, determined to understand how such a miraculous recovery had occurred. Yet no matter how many questions she asked, she received no clear answer, only further mockery and dismissiveness, leaving her with an ever-growing suspicion that something unnatural was at play. Elsewhere, within the quiet walls of her father's home, Linda searched through the cluttered study, her hands hesitating over various objects as she debated her next course of action. Her mind remained preoccupied with the events of the day, unable to shake the feeling that the man's recovery had defied all logic, that something beyond medical reasoning had been responsible for his survival. Frustrated and searching for answers, she found herself looking for something she had never before considered necessary: a silver knife. However, before she could find it, her father entered the room, his gaze sharp with curiosity as he questioned her actions. When she hesitated, struggling to form a response, his suspicion deepened and he pressed further, demanding to know what she needed the blade for. Unable to lie to him, she finally relented, recounting the story of what had transpired, explaining how the man, Josh, had claimed to have stumbled upon a hermit's inheritance hidden within a dungeon, where he had discovered a bottle of medicine with properties that defied explanation. She described how, upon his return, he had been attacked by an undead creature, suffering a wound that should have cost him his life. Yet by the time he awoke the following morning, his injury had vanished entirely, his body completely restored, the only evidence of the medicine's existence being the shattered remains of the bottle beneath his bed. Her father listened intently, his expression darkening with thought, for though he was not one to entertain superstitions, he could not deny that the details of the story pointed to something far beyond conventional medicine. If the liquid had truly disappeared without a trace, then the most likely explanation was that it had evaporated upon contact with the air. Yet even with that knowledge, the effects of the so-called medicine were impossible to ignore. With a heavy sigh, he admitted that if her account was true, then the substance was undoubtedly the work of a hermit's inheritance, a rare and ancient relic with properties capable of miraculous feats. Though before they could discuss the matter further, Josh himself appeared, stepping into the room with a smirk. His presence filling the space with a casual arrogance as he revealed that the dungeon where he had found the medicine lay deep within the HSH mountains. With an air of confidence, he declared that since he had been the one to retrieve the medicine, anything else that remained within the dungeon was rightfully his, an announcement that carried an unmistakable finality, as though he had already made up his mind to return, regardless of the dangers that awaited. Meanwhile, beneath the darkened sky, a campfire crackled softly as warriors rested after a long day of battle, the flickering flames casting long shadows against the worn ground. Among them, Charlene Deer stood near the edge of a river, his gaze distant as he washed the blood from his hands, the cool water offering a brief respite from the weight of his responsibilities. However, his solitude was soon interrupted by a voice from the darkness, a familiar presence making itself known as a figure emerged from the shadows. Seated casually on a nearby rock, watching him with an easy smirk, was Sherelle, an old acquaintance whose arrival carried the weight of unspoken intentions. Their conversation, though brief, was layered with meaning, as Sherelle spoke of the inevitable changes to come, of how the kingdom was on the brink of upheaval, with King Arthur's health deteriorating rapidly, his life nearing its end. Charlene, ever composed, acknowledged the news with a quiet nod, unmoved by the weight of the revelation. For he understood better than most that death was simply the natural order of things. However, Sherelle was not merely there to deliver news. He had come with a purpose, a question that carried with it the weight of future alliances. With a knowing gaze, he asked whether Charlene intended to align himself with Lord Bonin, one of the most influential figures in the looming battle for succession. Without hesitation, Charlene reaffirmed his loyalty to the Alberon family, making it clear that he had no intention of shifting his allegiance. Sherelle sighed, shaking his head, his disappointment evident. In his eyes, Charlene was wasting his potential, choosing loyalty over ambition, clinging to a fading house when greater opportunities lay ahead. Charlene remained silent for a long moment after hearing Sherelle's words, his expression unreadable as he processed the weight of what had just been revealed to him. The implications of Prince Tywell ascending the throne were dire, for if the rumors surrounding the man were true, then the kingdom was on the verge of ruin, its future hanging in the hands of a ruler unfit to lead. Sherelle, seeing the hesitation in the captain's eyes, allowed himself a small, knowing smile before continuing, his voice carrying an air of certainty as he stated that the one most likely to inherit the crown was indeed Tywell. However, rather than celebrating this inevitability, he made it clear that such a development was nothing short of disastrous, elaborating that the prince had a long history of cruelty, having been known to throw helpless people to wild beasts purely for his own amusement, his thirst for violence untempered by reason or restraint. He further revealed that Tywell had never received a proper education, nor had he ever been taught the intricacies of governance, instead leading a life of excess and debauchery, indulging in every vice imaginable without fear of consequence. If such a man were to sit upon the throne, then there was no doubt in Sherelle's mind that the country would soon crumble under his rule, descending into chaos as greed and tyranny overtook the once great kingdom. Lowering his voice, he then added something that made Charlene's blood run cold. Tywell was also the one responsible for the scar that now marred his face, a wound that had served as a constant reminder of the prince's cruelty, one that had never fully faded, just as the memory of that day had never left him. Charlene clenched his fists at the revelation, his knuckles whitening as his mind raced, though his response remained the same as before. If war were to break out over the throne, if the kingdom truly did descend into battle for the right to rule, then he would fight, as he always had, following the orders of his lord without hesitation. No matter his personal feelings, no matter his doubts, his duty remained unchanged. Within the castle, Lord Ian sat hunched over his desk, a frown creasing his brow as he attempted to write, only to grimace in frustration as his hand throbbed in protest, the soreness from his relentless training making even the simple act of holding a quill feel like a struggle. Setting it down with a sigh, he muttered his complaints, only to be met with the ever-familiar voice of Blenzor, who materialized beside him with an unimpressed scoff, berating him for acting like a child over such a minor inconvenience. Ignoring her jabs, Lord Ian instead mumbled that he hoped Linda would arrive soon to soothe the pain. Though before he could dwell on the thought, a sudden knock at the door drew his attention. The man entered, his posture stiff with urgency as he informed Lord Ian that a young man had arrived at the castle gates, claiming to have come on behalf of Linda. Immediately, Lord Ian straightened. His curiosity piqued as he ordered the visitor to be brought inside at once. Moments later, Josh entered, his face pale, his hands trembling as he struggled to maintain his composure. Without wasting any time, Lord Ian demanded to know what business he had with Linda, his patience wearing thin as he took in the man's obvious distress. Josh, barely able to steady himself, finally spoke, his voice laced with desperation as he pleaded for Lord Ian's help, revealing that Linda had been trapped inside a dungeon. For a brief moment, the room fell into stunned silence. Lord Ian, his expression hardening, ordered him to explain everything in detail. The story that followed was nothing short of shocking. Josh, along with Linda and Dr. Nicaro, had ventured into a dungeon, only for things to take a catastrophic turn. Though they had initially believed it to be a simple exploration, they quickly found themselves being pursued by something far beyond their expectations. The dungeon was vast, teeming with undead monsters, its depths far more treacherous than anything they had anticipated. In the chaos, Josh had barely managed to escape, yet Linda and her father had been left behind, their fate unknown. The man, listening closely, exchanged a glance with Lord Ian before speaking, his voice grim as he pointed out the obvious if what Josh was saying was true. Then the likelihood of Linda and Dr. Nicaro still being alive was slim. Lord Ian, refusing to accept that possibility, immediately turned to the man and issued a direct command: gather the soldiers at once. Within minutes, the entire military force of the kingdom stood assembled before the palace, their formation sharp, their expressions filled with both curiosity and apprehension as they awaited orders. Their commander stepped forward, his voice booming as he barked instructions, declaring that every soldier was to be equipped with silver swords, the only known weapon capable of effectively combating the undead. Meanwhile, Lord Ian stood at the forefront, donning his own set of armor, his fingers wrapping around the hilt of his newly acquired silver sword, testing its weight as he examined its craftsmanship. His mind was focused, his resolve unwavering, though the man, seeing him prepare as though he intended to fight alongside the troops, could not help but interject, questioning whether their lord truly planned to wield a weapon in battle. Lord Ian, unbothered by the doubt, merely responded that this was an important matter. However, the man quickly countered, reminding him that regardless of how valuable Linda and Nicaro were, Lord Ian himself was far more important to the kingdom, a statement that momentarily caught the young lord off guard. Pausing, Lord Ian stared at him in mild confusion before shaking his head, dismissing the notion entirely. He argued that all lives were important, though he also saw an opportunity beyond mere rescue. If this dungeon truly contained as many monsters as Josh had described, then it likely held treasures as well, artifacts and riches that could be used to help pay off his debts. Thus, in his mind, there was no reason to hesitate. The expedition was necessary, not only for Linda's sake, but for the potential rewards hidden within the dungeon's depths. Moments later, as the soldiers stood fully equipped, their armor gleaming beneath the sun, Lord Ian stepped forward and addressed them, his voice loud and commanding as he began his speech. He declared that he would personally lead them into battle, that they would unite as one and conquer the dungeon together, claiming its riches while wiping out the undead that lurked within. However, rather than inspiring confidence, his speech was met with silence. The soldiers, standing stiffly in their ranks, exchanged uncertain glances, their expressions unreadable. Some of them, like Nervi, found the entire display laughable, unable to take their lord seriously as a leader. If he had been in their position, he would have thought him ridiculous. Realizing that words alone would not be enough, Lord Ian changed tactics. Suddenly, he shouted that if none of the soldiers cheered until their voices went hoarse, then they would die at his hands instead. That, at least, prompted a response, albeit a quiet, hesitant one. Annoyed, Lord Ian barked at them again, demanding that they raise their voices, that they prepare themselves for battle with the energy befitting warriors about to charge into the unknown. Slowly, the morale began to shift, the soldiers growing louder, their voices rising as their reluctance was slowly overtaken by the energy of the moment. Seizing the opportunity, Lord Ian declared that they would wipe out every undead creature they encountered, that they would purge the dungeon of its darkness, and as he spoke, the soldiers repeated his words, their enthusiasm building. Finally, as a final push, he promised that when their mission was complete, when the dungeon was conquered, they would return to the castle and celebrate with a grand feast, drinking until they could no longer stand. That was the moment the shift truly took hold. Cheers erupted through the ranks, the soldiers roaring in approval, their voices carrying across the training grounds as their excitement finally ignited. Lord Ian, watching the transformation unfold, allowed himself a small, satisfied smirk. Now, they were ready. The man, still reeling from the energy and conviction with which the Lord had rallied the soldiers, found himself both impressed and deeply unnerved. His mind struggling to reconcile the man standing before him with the one he had known for so long, the sickly, weak, and seemingly unambitious lord who had spent much of his life bedridden. The contrast was staggering, and as he exchanged glances with the commander, he could see the same uncertainty reflected in the older man's face. The commander, shaking his head in disbelief, muttered that this was hardly the lord they had come to expect, his tone filled with both admiration and concern. However, despite their shared hesitation, the reality remained unchanged. The lord had made up his mind, and at this point, there was no stopping him. When the commander quietly suggested that perhaps they should attempt to dissuade him from entering such a dangerous dungeon, the man only sighed, acknowledging the futility of such a task. The atmosphere had already shifted completely, and once Lord Ian had set his sights on something, there was little anyone could do to turn him away. Their only option now was to ensure his safety, watching over him as he led them into the unknown. With the soldiers finally prepared, Lord Ian wasted no time in issuing the next order. Without hesitation, he announced that they would be setting out immediately, his voice carrying a level of authority that left no room for doubt. As they began their journey, he rode alongside the commander, his mind filled with nothing but thoughts of Linda, his heart hammering with the hope that she was still alive, still waiting to be rescued. The path leading to the dungeon was treacherous, a narrow and jagged mountain trail that forced the soldiers to press themselves against the rocky cliffs, each step carefully measured to avoid slipping into the ravine below. Lord Ian rode directly behind the commander, with the man and the rest of the soldiers following closely behind, the sheer difficulty of the terrain forcing them into single file. Among them, Tyre, the man who had initially pleaded for the Lord's help, found himself observing Lord Ian with renewed curiosity, unable to shake the realization that the rumors surrounding the young lord no longer seemed to hold any truth. Contrary to the whispers of cowardice and frailty that had surrounded his name, the man riding at the front of their forces showed neither hesitation nor fear, his expression composed and resolute as he led them toward the dungeon without a hint of uncertainty. The commander, still focused on the mission at hand, inquired as to how much farther they had to travel. In response, Tyre informed him that they were close, that they would reach their destination once they crossed the ravine, a statement that only earned him an irritated sigh from the commander, who muttered that they should have reported the discovery of the dungeon much sooner, as it would have earned them a proper reward rather than leading to the disastrous situation they were now facing. Exhausted from both the physical strain and the scolding, Tyre admitted that, in the end, the dungeon was likely only worth a handful of gold coins at best, though his words only provoked further irritation from the commander, who coldly remarked that if they had been so confident in its insignificance, they should have completed the exploration on their own, rather than running to their lord for assistance. The rebuke left Tyre speechless, his frustration clear, but before he could offer rebuttal, another voice cut through the tension, surprising him. It was the Lord. Lord Ian, his tone unexpectedly calm, dismissed the commander's harsh words, stating simply that it took a great deal of courage to ask for help, that no one should be ashamed of doing so when faced with danger beyond their control. More than anything, he urged them to focus on what mattered most, saving Linda and Dr. Nicaro. At that moment, something in Tyre's expression shifted. He looked back at Lord Ian, his regret evident, his silence taking on a new weight as he reflected on his choices. Not long after, the group finally arrived at the dungeon's entrance, a secluded cave with an unassuming, narrow opening, its darkness stretching inward like the gaping maw of a beast. Tyre stepped forward, guiding them as he explained the layout of what lay ahead. He recounted how, upon first entering the cave, they had discovered what appeared to be nothing more than a small stone chamber, believing at first that this was the extent of the dungeon. However, as they ventured deeper, they had made a shocking discovery. Beyond the chamber's walls lay an entire underground village. The revelation struck Lord Ian like a bolt of lightning. An underground village? He pressed for confirmation, and Tyre, though still visibly shaken by his previous experiences, affirmed that what he had seen was no illusion. The strangest part, he added, was that the village contained something that should have been impossible to sky. As they made their way forward, Lord Ian questioned how such a thing could exist, how a place so deeply buried beneath the surface of the world could contain a moon, a sky, things that should have been reserved only for the lands above. It was at that moment that Blenzor, the ever-observant spirit, materialized beside him, offering her insight with a tone of detached amusement. She explained that dungeons such as these were remnants of fractured worlds, places born from the cracks between dimensions, where the rules of reality no longer applied. In such places, it was not unusual to find a sun or a moon, nor was it uncommon to encounter things that defied all understanding. As they delved deeper into the cave, Lord Ian continued to press Tyre for information, asking if he had been separated from Linda and Nicaro within the underground village itself. Tyre confirmed this, stating that while he had lost sight of them during their frantic escape, he believed there was a high chance that they had survived and were now hiding somewhere within the village, waiting for rescue. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of walking, they arrived at their first true landmark, a collection of ancient, human-made structures, their presence confirming beyond any doubt that civilization had once existed here. As they descended a worn, crumbling staircase, the air around them grew heavier, a sinister presence settling upon them. Then, without warning, a creature appeared before them. Dressed in the tattered remains of a soldier's uniform, its hollow eyes burned with an unnatural light, a skeletal figure radiating a malicious aura that sent shivers through even the most battle-hardened men among them. Without hesitation, the commander acted first, throwing his sword with incredible speed, aiming to strike before the creature could react. However, the skeleton proved far more formidable than expected. It moved with alarming agility, raising its shield just in time to block the attack, its reflexes sharp, its instincts honed. Lord Ian, watching from the sidelines, could barely contain his shock. How could something made only of bones move with such speed? Blenzor, reappearing beside him, offered an explanation, her voice calm as she stated that this level of agility was natural for the undead. as they often possessed far greater combat ability than even the most experienced human soldiers.
The knight raised his blade as the shadow beast lunged forward. "Protect his lordship!" someone shouted urgently. Ian turned swiftly. His armored guard blocked the blow, bracing his shield against the forceful demon's strike. The shield met the enemy's claws with a thunderous crash. Sparks flew. Ian watched with clenched fists. The demon leapt high, spinning midair with deadly precision. The knight followed, sword drawn and gaze steady. Their blades clashed. Steel hissed against shadow. The knight pushed forward, determined to end this fight quickly. The knight swung hard, his blade cut through the air, aimed at the creature's exposed side. Steel pierced flesh. The demon staggered as the blade buried deep. Purple energy cracked around its chest. It roared in pain, eyes glowing fiercely. The flames burst from within, lighting the corridor with blue. The demon collapsed, engulfed by fire. Its ashes scattered while the knights above watched, blades still drawn, alert. Ian lowered his sword, exhaling sharply. "He sure went down with a big fuss," he muttered calmly. Ian and his knights descended the staircase. The demon's charred remains below, still glowing with lingering magical energy. He recalled records of rogue alchemists who used abandoned dungeons to conduct forbidden experiments away from law. These alchemists often coexisted with dungeon monsters, using them for research or defense against unwanted intruders. Reaching a sealed chamber, Ian halted. According to reports, this room stored remnants of their hidden work. He stepped cautiously into the chamber, ready to examine anything left behind that could explain the summoning. A group of undead soldiers emerged from the shadows, their glowing eyes locked onto Ian's advancing team. Recognizing the threat, Ian quickly assessed their numbers. These weren't mindless husks, they were strategically positioned. Without hesitation, Ian gave the command. His knights surged forward, drawing weapons with precision and discipline. Ian stayed near the entrance, ensuring the path was secure, while the squad engaged the undead directly. The battle erupted instantly. Blades clashed, spells lit the chamber, and each knight struck down an enemy. A knight drove his weapon into a skeleton's chest. Its bones cracked as blue energy exploded outward. Another soldier swept low, severing limbs with swift strikes. The enemies collapsed, unable to reform or retaliate. Ian observed their coordination. With the undead falling quickly, he nodded once, satisfied with their execution. Behind him, the young noble clapped lightly, impressed by the knight's efficiency as the last foes burned. With the chamber cleared, the squad regrouped. Ian led the march deeper, steps echoing through the dungeon. As the team advanced, Ian suddenly halted. A strange energy filled the air, urging caution and awareness. Above them, a glowing red orb illuminated the cavern. It looked unnatural, like a false underground moon. Ian observed the strange sky. The terrain, color, and atmosphere felt alien, as if beneath another dimension. One of the knights spotted something. Ian followed his gaze toward a large, ruined settlement hidden in shadow. Within the crumbling structures, a cloaked skeleton turned, sensing movement. Its eyes flared as it silently vanished. The cloaked skeleton peeked through a slit in the wall, silently tracking the knight's movement through the ruins. Inside, a man in worn robes noticed its behavior. He questioned why it pursued them so persistently. Beside him, a young woman reminded him he'd previously injured the creature during a confrontation with debris. The skeleton turned, locking its glowing eyes on the room's entrance. It had sensed their exact location. The man's face tensed as realization struck. "Oh no, I think it's onto us," he whispered, backing away. The man made a plan he would draw the creature away while his daughter used that moment. She refused to flee. She reminded him she led them here and would face the danger equally. Stepping closer, she insisted they could win if they fought together. He realized her strength wasn't just physical. He nodded, finally convinced. They couldn't waste time, this might be their only chance to escape the ruins. He gave clear instructions. While he blocked the enemy's attack, she must land the fatal silver blow. The two moved cautiously between buildings. Every step echoed, drawing attention from shadows gathering all around them. Without warning, undead creatures began to swarm the path. The duo froze as they were surrounded below. Looking up, they realized more enemies lurked above, waiting in silence. They were being watched from all sides. Elsewhere, Ian noticed the strange quiet and considered how to force a response from hidden allies or threats. He asked Rondo who might arrive faster if signaled Linda and her father, or the nearby undead. Ian tightened his gloves and gave the signal. The bait strategy would reveal who was nearby first. Rondo lit the signal fire. All knights gathered behind it, forming a defensive line with steady focus. They waited for movement. "Begin," Ian commanded. Flames rose, shadows stretched, and weapons readied for an incoming threat. Elsewhere, Linda's father engaged first. The undead attacker struck fast, its blade nearly splitting his wooden shield in half. He barely blocked the hit. The heavy strike pushed him back, sweat forming as he prepared to counter. Linda shouted a warning as the cloaked skeleton dashed in. Its blade swung with lethal intent. The undead pierced forward, stabbing at close range. Linda's movement forced it to miss its true target. More undead figures began to close in, forming a wall around them. Their numbers continued to grow. Breathing heavily, her father cursed under pressure. The enemies weren't retreating, they were increasing by the second. Linda paused, gripping her dagger tighter. Her thoughts turned toward Ian, hoping he would arrive soon. Linda thought of Ian and the others. She braced herself, even if she had to act alone. Above, flares ignited the sky. The signal had launched a blazing warning meant for allies nearby. Linda looked up, eyes wide. She recognized the signal instantly. Their chance to survive had just arrived. She and her father turned at once, alerted by the light. It meant Ian was close now. The undead forces halted, distracted by the glow. Some turned toward it, reacting to the flare's magic. Linda and her father stood ready as a sudden gust signaled incoming movement. Someone was approaching fast. The undead army stirred again. Their flames flared wildly as they sensed power returning to the field. The rumble echoed across the ruins. Ian's squad had arrived, their presence shaking the enemy formation visibly. Ian spotted the group ahead. "They're retreating first," he noted coldly. He ordered the knights to intercept immediately. His forces charged in. Blades clashed with bone, energy exploded. Above, a figure observed quietly from the cliffs. Ian stepped forward with his knights, calm and composed. The survivors recognized him instantly and gasped in relief. Linda's eyes welled with tears. She whispered, "He has come to save us," her grip tightening in hope. Ian's knights clashed violently with the undead. Blades, shields, and energy collided in a chaotic, brutal confrontation. Enemies fell one by one, but their numbers kept growing. Ian struck down another as the wave thickened. Realizing the odds, Ian muttered that the enemy was overwhelming. He reached for Rondo, urgency in his tone. Rondo nodded quickly. They dashed into the fray, determined to reach the others and shift the battle's momentum. A knight blocked Ian's path, warning him not to engage directly. "You cannot fight!" he shouted in fear. A bright aura flickered around Ian. In an instant, he activated a hidden power and disappeared from view. Rondo gasped, confused by the sudden light. The energy pulsed as Ian reappeared far ahead, unharmed. Ian's voice rang out. "How did you get over there?" Rondo called, stunned by the sudden movement. Ignoring protests, Ian charged alone into battle. His knights shouted for him to stop, rushing to follow. Ian yelled back with authority. "If you want to save me, fight. That's an order," he commanded. Ian fought through the undead horde, cutting them down with precision. His sword left trails of blue fire. Each strike was deliberate. He dodged enemy blades with sharp instincts, eliminating threats before they could regroup. Ian locked eyes with a stronger foe, expression steady. This opponent wasn't like the others he'd faced. The creature lunged. Ian countered immediately, slashing across its chest. A surge of energy erupted between their weapons. A voice echoed. "You reveal your power too easily. I feel your pressure, your flaws." Ian stood ready. The floating red spirit mocked Ian, urging him to retreat. But Ian stood firm. Ignoring the taunt, Ian responded with sarcasm, raising his sword. "Do you know how much it costs to train soldiers?" A skeleton warrior lunged from above. Ian turned quickly, barely deflecting the ambush with a burst of force. But another enemy struck first. Ian grunted as a blade slashed across his side, drawing a sharp gasp. He clenched his jaw, stabbing forward in retaliation. His glowing sword pierced the skeleton's skull clean through. Ian advanced through the battlefield, surrounded by the dead. The red spirit hovered nearby, silently observing his performance. Without pause, Ian cut through another wave of enemies. He showed no signs of slowing or hesitation. The spirit provided no assistance. Despite being bound to Ian, it merely followed, offering no combat support. Driven by growing frustration, Ian unleashed his energy in a sudden shockwave, destroying enemies in every direction. A distant knight watched in awe. Ian's control, speed, and strength had evolved beyond what anyone expected. Ian's intense combat drew attention. His unexpected presence on the front lines left nearby soldiers shocked and confused. As Ian's blade struck down another enemy, the soldiers confirmed it was truly him leading the assault. The dark-haired knight, realizing Ian's resolve, raised his sword, choosing to rally the others rather than doubt. He shouted orders, reigniting morale. With Ian actively fighting, the troops' hesitation gave way to determination and unity. Knights surged forward again, pushing through the undead ranks. The battlefield shifted as Ian's courage empowered the entire force. Ian, breathing heavily, scanned the field. The enemy lines were thinning. The battle's end was drawing near. A concerned knight ran to Ian's side, noticing his wounds. He asked if Ian was still stable. Ian turned, revealing a bleeding gash on his back. The knight froze, realizing the wound was serious. Ian dismissed the concern. He accepted injury as part of war and encouraged the others to continue. But elsewhere, a red-clad enemy watched Ian intently. Her voice trembled. His resilience had clearly shaken her expectations. Ian froze mid-step. A powerful presence surged overhead, drawing his gaze toward the crimson-lit sky. Above the cliffs, a dark figure hovered against the red moon, its silhouette massive and ominous. The woman beside him panicked. She recognized the threat immediately and urged everyone to flee before it arrived. She identified the entity not just undead, but a dragon's vassal, a spirit bound by ancient power. Before Ian could respond, a violent blast struck the area. The impact shattered the ground beneath their feet. Rondo and the others were scattered by the explosion. Ian searched desperately for signs of movement amid debris. He called out repeatedly, voice echoing through smoke. The red-cloaked woman cut in, urging him to listen instead. She warned him clearly. This territory now belonged to the undead knight. Escape was the only option left. But Ian froze as he saw a monstrous figure emerge, a knight twisted by death and darkness. Ian responded calmly. He refused to flee, unwilling to abandon his allies. Retreat wasn't part of his path. The woman shouted in frustration, warning Ian of the consequences if he continued down this suicidal path. Ian stared back, undeterred. He questioned her logic, asking what future was worth living without conviction. He raised his sword once more. To him, protecting his people now defined what his future would become. The woman fell silent. Ian's resolve shook even her confidence as she realized his choice was final. Ian stood alone in the darkness. Without visibility or magic, he knew an ambush could end everything. The woman's eyes widened in panic. She spotted movement and screamed, warning Ian to look above him. Ian turned sharply. A dark-clawed figure dropped from the shadows, aiming to strike him down directly. He blocked the incoming blow, clashing swords with the undead knight. The force cracked the air around them. Both fighters moved rapidly. Ian deflected another hit but struggled to keep up with the creature's speed. A sharp counter forced Ian back. The ground cracked beneath him as he cursed, struggling to regain footing. Ian halted as a heavier presence filled the space. His instincts sharpened, something stronger had entered the field. From the darkness emerged armored figures with glowing eyes. Their silent entrance carried overwhelming weight and authority. The woman glanced at Ian, voice grim. His survival had been fortune. This opponent was entirely different. She urged him to flee immediately. The red-armored knight began his advance, radiating dark power with each step. Ian hesitated only for a second before shifting his stance. He knew escape wouldn't be simple anymore. Ian stood tense, silently calculating his next move. The enemy's overwhelming presence left no room for hesitation. The Red Knight raised his massive weapon. Power surged through the air as the ground began to tremble. The woman's warning broke the silence, her voice desperate. Ian's name echoed as the strike neared. Ian spotted an opening. With quick focus, he prepared to counter. This moment was the only chance. He launched forward, meeting the incoming blow. Energy exploded on impact as their clash shook the entire battlefield. The Red Knight scanned the smoke-filled battlefield. His target had vanished in the chaos of the clash. He turned, sensing something was wrong. The spot he struck was empty. There was no body, no blood. A surge of magic flared nearby. Ian reappeared behind the knight, propelled by teleportation magic midair. The knight slowly turned to face him, surprised by Ian's sudden repositioning. The momentum had shifted. Ian shouted confidently from above, announcing his return. His expression was fierce. He wasn't finished yet. The undead knight's horse reared violently, reacting to Ian's sudden appearance. The rider gripped tightly, eyes narrowing. Without hesitation, the knight charged. His cursed blade swept upward toward Ian, leaving a trail of black flame. Ian descended swiftly from above, blade aimed at the demon's chest, ignoring the swirling dark energy below. The demon countered instantly, summoning a swirling vortex of green and purple power, preparing to strike back hard. Ian grabbed the glowing crystal, evading the clawed strike, then struck downward to break the enemy's momentum. Another knight charged from behind, yelling, "Take this!" While swinging his blade toward the demon's exposed shoulder, the blade pierced, slightly surprising the demon. Its armor cracked, and it gasped, eyes wide with disbelief. The demon trembled in rage. Ian stood firm, aware the soldiers nearby might become unintended targets. With a swift step, Ian dashed forward, slashing the air to pull the demon's focus back. "Over here! Try to keep up!" Ian shouted, moving fast to lead the enemy away safely. The demon gave chase through the broken city, its form distorted by the power it held. The soldiers watched in stunned silence, realizing Ian was baiting the monster alone to protect them. The demon smashed into the ground, sending shockwaves through the ruins as soldiers witnessed the destruction unfold. Thick shadows spread across the battlefield. Civilians and knights stood frozen, watching the corrupted energy expand outward. Ian reappeared from the smoke, unfazed. He analyzed the enemy's movements, preparing to strike without hesitation. The demon's form pulsed unnaturally, drawing attention. Some mistook Ian's return for illusion caused by intense pressure. Without delay, Ian launched forward. His sword met the demon's claws in a powerful direct counterattack. Ian struggled to breathe. His repeated teleportation drained stamina, and fatigue rapidly slowed his physical response time. Sensing danger, he shifted position fast. The mounted undead knight charged again, relentless and unyielding in pursuit. Ian kept moving, analyzing patterns. Prolonged engagement wouldn't work. His enemy showed no signs of fatigue or hesitation. A voice echoed within his mind, warning him. The enemy couldn't be beaten through endurance-based tactics. Ian recalled the moment his sword was shattered. This enemy's raw power was still beyond him. Ian calculated his limit. Only 3 more teleports remained before his mana reserves would completely run dry. A loud roar echoed. Ian paused briefly and looked around, unsure what new threat had just emerged. To his surprise, a group of soldiers appeared, rushing forward despite the enemy's overwhelming presence. Ian questioned their presence, but they responded quickly, shouting their intent to reinforce and support his fight. One soldier blocked a deadly strike, deflecting it just in time, buying Ian precious seconds to recover. The undead knight locked eyes with the defenders, then summoned a massive vertical energy strike with precision. A beam of power descended rapidly, tearing through the air and blasting into the center with force. The ground exploded. One soldier was thrown back, coughing blood from the impact, clearly wounded but conscious. Another knight sprinted forward without hesitation, determined to stop the enemy's advance despite witnessing the first casualty. He blocked the next swing directly, steel clashing against corrupted magic, pushing back with all his strength. The knight delivered a clean strike, clashing with the enemy's corrupted blade. Holding his ground under pressure, his attack landed, but the demon's dark armor absorbed most of it, pushing the knight backward violently. The knight was slashed across the chest. He collapsed, injured, unable to stop the advancing undead knight. Despite their wounds, other soldiers stepped forward, rallying with a unified cry to defend Ian at all costs. Ian shouted in frustration, ordering them to retreat. He knew their bravery would only lead to death. One soldier was struck down by the undead knight, his body falling as others continued fighting desperately. The demonic spirit mocked Ian's allies, suggesting retreat. Ian's anger rose, rejecting the idea with visible frustration. Ian clenched his fists, his pulse racing. He refused to abandon his people to buy time. Something caught his eye. He paused, confused, as an unfamiliar presence suddenly entered the battlefield's edge. 2 civilians stood calmly, unharmed. Their composed expressions stood in stark contrast to the surrounding battlefield chaos. The girl stood silently, watching Ian, her expression filled with concern but unsure how to intervene. The dark spirit insulted Ian, calling him a coward and mocking their prior arrangement involving the dragon's eye. As Ian remained still, the spirit questioned his hesitation, growing impatient with the delay in action. Ian smiled faintly, masking pressure. He admitted his nerves while trying to stay composed under increasing demands. He gripped the ground, refocusing. The moment wasn't surrender, it was strategy. He just needed better positioning. Ian looked at the civilians again, reminded of his responsibilities, their safety anchoring his scattered thoughts. He stood tall, eyes focused. Protecting others and honoring past sacrifices reignited his will to fight. With a firm grip, he recalled past victories. This wasn't his first overwhelming battle and wouldn't be last. Drawing his sword, he stepped forward without hesitation. The blade glowed bright with new resolve and clarity. The spirit reacted in surprise, sensing Ian's sudden surge in power. The balance of control had shifted. Ian advanced, sword radiating energy. The undead knight turned, locking eyes with the approaching threat without flinching. With steady steps, Ian showed no fear. His presence alone made the corrupted knight pause briefly. The soldiers watched in awe, whispering his aura had changed. They realized something new had awakened in Ian. The spirit observed closely, recognizing the glow. Though faint, she confirmed Ian was now channeling force energy. She asked how he did it. Ian casually replied it was his first time using it directly. The spirit reacted in shock. Ian's sudden mastery of force caught even her off guard completely. Another voice warned her to stay quiet. Ian was advancing fast, and the tension shifted instantly. The undead knight jolted, sensing Ian's approach. For the first time, its movements showed hesitation. Ian charged directly, sword glowing. The knight swung, but Ian stayed focused, his timing clean and fearless. Their weapons clashed violently. Ian's blade, now empowered, sliced cleanly through the enemy's strike with overwhelming momentum. Ian dashed forward, ignoring the spirit's warnings. He was fully aware of the risks he faced. Watching the knight's power surge, Ian analyzed calmly charging straight in would be reckless and likely fatal. He repositioned quickly, drawing attention. His voice echoed through the battlefield, baiting the knight with precise control. The undead knight turned sharply, rushing toward Ian's voice, falling into the tactical maneuver without second thought. The spirit watched from behind, narrowing her eyes. She knew Ian was planning something, but couldn't guess what. The soldiers called out anxiously. Ian's calm demeanor under pressure kept them from panicking or interfering. The undead knight lunged with immense force. Ian readied his stance, bracing for the oncoming dark strike. Their weapons clashed again. Ian resisted, though pain surged through his body from the forceful impact. He ascended mid-air, narrowly dodging a follow-up blow. His eyes remained locked on the enemy's movement. Hovering above, Ian's eyes glowed intensely. He sensed the timing this next move had to count. The knight's eyes widened as Ian vanished in a flash, charging directly from above without warning. Ian's blade connected midair, slashing through the dark armor with enhanced force, breaking the knight's defensive stance. Landing swiftly, Ian kept momentum. He gripped his sword tightly, preparing to continue the offensive without hesitation. The spirit observed his move, realizing Ian used warp offensively instead of defensively, a bold but dangerous strategy. Wasting no time, Ian called to Rondo from a distance, urgently demanding a replacement weapon mid-combat. Rondo tossed the blade into the air. It spun fast, descending directly toward Ian's position below. Ian leapt upward, catching the sword mid-air with precision. His grip tightened as power surged through him. With eyes locked forward, he stabilized his stance, then prepared to unleash another force-empowered airborne strike. He descended like a spear, energy surrounding him. The ground shook violently as his strike landed hard. The city glowed under fading light. Calm returned after chaos, as silence replaced the battlefield's roar. Ian lay unconscious, body wrapped in bandages. His wounds were deep, but his breathing remained steady. His eyes slowly opened. He blinked against the light, confused, but alert he had survived the fight. The soldiers spotted him awake. One cried out joyfully, rushing toward him with relieved, grateful eyes. Supported gently, Ian winced in pain but stood. The girl helped him walk, urging caution with care. Ian smiled softly, expressing relief that Linda was unharmed despite the destruction they all had endured. Linda looked down, overwhelmed by gratitude. Her voice trembled as she thanked Ian for saving everyone. Tears welled in her eyes. Ian panicked briefly, unsure how to respond, then gently tried comforting her. Ian asked if she had healed him. She shook her head, saying it was her father. Accepting that calmly, Ian nodded. Then, with a faint smile, he asked where Nakamo had gone. Nakamo remained busy tending to the wounded. His steady hands moved between the injured without rest. Ian acknowledged Nakamo's efforts, noting he must be overwhelmed. He turned to Rondo for a report. Rondo quickly updated him. 15 soldiers were in critical condition, with 37 others recovering from various wounds. Ian asked about casualties. Rondo confirmed no deaths, and those seriously hurt were expected to survive. Linda stepped forward, voice low. She blamed herself, offering to accept any punishment Ian deemed necessary. A young man stepped forward, reminding Linda she had come here without understanding the full situation. Ian responded calmly, explaining Josh had already told him everything about their search for a miracle cure. Curious, Ian asked the obvious question: had they found what they were looking for during their exploration? They confirmed discovering something, a carved message in ancient text located at the dungeon's stone chamber entrance. Linda explained parts of the writing were damaged. They'd need someone skilled to translate the language. The young man pointed at the injured. If the text held answers, they had to pursue it. Ian agreed immediately, stating they must first translate the text to understand how the potion works. Linda confirmed she'd seen the potion's effects before. She believed it was worth investing time researching. Ian smiled, trusting her. He knew Linda's resolve would be enough to see it through. Motivated, Linda responded with determination. She promised to do whatever it took to complete the elixir. Ian suggested Linda assist Nakamo with healing duties. She nodded firmly, eager to be of use. Satisfied, Ian shifted attention toward the remaining troops. They still had work to do before leaving. The soldiers gathered, awaiting orders. Ian reminded them they didn't come this far just to retreat empty-handed. With renewed energy, the troops cheered. They were ready to explore and uncover whatever treasures remained hidden. As the moon rose over the quiet canyon city, their next expedition silently took shape beneath it. The search party stood in disappointment. Despite all effort, the ruins offered no treasure or artifacts. Ian admitted their hopes were high, but nothing of value remained. His voice was calm, not bitter. The spirit laughed mockingly. She seemed amused by their failed search, offering no sympathy to their effort. A soldier informed Ian the preparations for departure were complete. Everything was ready to head home. Ian smiled. Being alive is reward enough, he said, as they marched together toward the rising dawn. The soldiers marched in formation, their expressions calm. The danger had passed, but fatigue lingered silently. Ian led them forward. Though still recovering, he held his head high with quiet determination. Weeks later, the sun rose over peaceful rooftops. The city stood untouched by battle's distant shadow. Back at the estate, order returned. The gardens and halls buzzed with normalcy and quiet duties. Ian lay in the grass alone. The breeze was soft. For now, everything was at peace. A spirit yelled from above, demanding Ian resume training. Ian groaned, too sleepy to care much. Startled by the noise, Ian opened his eyes lazily, not ready to leave the grass yet. A knight approached, reporting that the royal financier was already waiting for Ian in his office without moving. Ian told the knight to summon the financier instead. Relaxation clearly took priority today. The financier sighed at the top of the stairs. Frustrated, Ian made him walk back down. The financier complained while catching his breath, frustrated that Ian made him descend all those stairs. Ian greeted him casually, still resting in the grass. He called out to the man warmly. Ian explained his lazy posture, saying the sunlight made it hard to stand. Toman politely dismissed concern. Ian turned to Rondo and asked for privacy. He needed to speak with the financier alone. Rondo gave a silent nod and stepped away, leaving Ian and the financier to begin their talk. Ian revealed he had gone to the basement yesterday and discovered something that left him stunned. Toman's eyes widened in shock, demanding to know what had caused such a dramatic reaction. Ian answered calmly but firmly the basement safe, expected to be full, was completely and suspiciously empty. He reminded Toman of his earlier promise to return what he had stolen if granted forgiveness. Ian glared, accusing him of relaxing while others risked their lives. His voice carried firm disappointment. Toman stammered, claiming the missing funds were scattered and would take time to recover completely. Ian reminded him bluntly the money belonged to the estate. Delaying its return made him look guilty. His tone sharpened. The idea of replacing Toman became more tempting the longer the funds remained missing. Ian glared down. Toman froze, too afraid to speak further, clearly shaken by the implied threat. Trying to recover, Toman shifted the topic, boasting the administrator praised his recent tax cuts and reforms. Toman nervously defended himself, insisting the public praised him for tax cuts that he had implemented. Ian stayed quiet, his expression cold. He questioned how many people hated him because of Toman's actions. He compared Toman unfavorably to Noah's, stating Toman should strive to be at least half as useful, Ian repeated. How upsetting. The words felt heavier, now loaded with doubt and distrust toward his subordinate. Toman pushed back. He implied the administrator enabled everything, and the real corruption wasn't just his alone. Ian calmly stated he already knew the truth. The administrator had confessed everything to him last night. He revealed the administrator admitted to his crimes and explained every detail of his personal misconduct. Toman was stunned. Ian's expression didn't change. He had clearly anticipated the financier's reaction all along. Ian added that the administrator had promised to return all stolen funds, making restitution without resistance. Dismissing him without emotion, Ian ordered Toman to leave. Conversation and his patience had come to an end. Toman walked away angrily, muttering that Noah's betrayed him without hesitation the moment things got difficult. He gritted his teeth, vowing to watch how long Ian and Noah's could remain allies. Elsewhere, the royal court whispered of succession. With the aging king near death, unrest began to grow. Ian lay quietly in the garden, unaware of how soon chaos might test his rightful claim. The academy tower gleamed under daylight as Ian prepared for another intense afternoon of study inside. Ian sat buried in paperwork, flipping through documents, while Linda sorted books silently in the background. He raised a hand, slightly hesitant, and called out to her, "Linda, can you help me?" Linda approached, leaning close to Ian's side, her voice calm as she scanned the confusing page. Ian froze as her hair brushed his shoulder. Her subtle scent suddenly disrupted all his concentration completely. Linda confessed she was frustrated with the translation delay. Unsure how to advance without proper guidance, she explained they needed a specialist, someone beyond her father's knowledge, someone who truly understood the ancient language. Linda shared a rumor about a man who might help, asking Ian to summon him immediately. Ian looked puzzled, questioning where she expected him to summon a qualified expert on such short notice. Linda hesitated, then revealed the man was imprisoned for fraud, leaving Ian visibly shocked by the suggestion. Linda assured Ian that despite being a con man, the man's ancient language skills were nearly unmatched. Ian asked curiously for his name. After learning the man once served as a royal scholar, Linda answered confidently that he was known as Cain the Alchemist, once a famous name in academia. Cain, now imprisoned, hauled lumber with chains on his wrists under a guard's sharp voice and watchful eye. Despite exhaustion, Cain clenched his teeth and pressed on, unaware that someone would soon change his fate. While working silently, Cain suddenly sensed movement behind him and began turning as something swooshed past. Before he could react, a sharp blade stabbed into his back, making his body jolt in pain. His attacker smirked coldly and muttered, "This is revenge for yesterday." Tightening grip on the hidden knife, the attacker pulled the blade again, aiming higher, but Cain quickly caught sight and clenched his jaw tightly. With a sudden twist, Cain's massive hand grabbed the attacker's head, his strength overwhelming in that moment. Cain slammed the attacker into the ground with full force, ending the ambush in a single blow. The attacker groaned, barely conscious, pain spreading as he realized his plan had completely failed in seconds. Cain glared down and warned coldly, "Don't mess with me if you're not prepared to die." Just then, someone shouted Cain from behind, halting his next move as urgency filled the air. A guard unit rushed in, weapons drawn, shouting for Cain to drop the man immediately and surrender. Cain dropped the injured attacker to the ground without hesitation, stepping forward to face the incoming guards. The first guard struck with speed, but Cain absorbed the hit and retaliated with a powerful punch. More guards charged in. Cain blocked and countered, each blow landing hard against the armored red uniforms. A blur of fists and impacts followed, until all sound faded into a heavy crimson silence. Later, guards stood silently over the scene, prisoners restrained, attackers unconscious, and Cain seated. Finally subdued in chains, Cain adjusted his loose clothes, his muscles bruised but steady after the rough skirmish with guards. He glanced sideways, checking his surroundings, alert for any sudden movement or signs of another possible threat. With a grimace, Cain spit to the side, trying to clear the lingering taste of blood. He rubbed his stomach slowly, feeling the sting from wounds that hadn't yet stopped aching beneath skin. A voice suddenly called his name, Cain, snapping his attention forward, eyes narrowing in cautious recognition and readiness. A guard gestured firmly for Cain to enter the carriage, reminding him his destination was already set. Meanwhile, back at the estate, Ian remained focused on his work as someone approached the room. The man delivered news that the captain had left the village and was returning safely home. Ian brightened with excitement and relief, eager to reward those responsible for finishing such a mission. He praised their success, but admitted something else. Something troubling had been on his mind since the morning. Ian looked concerned and asked what was wrong, noticing the sudden shift in the man's tone. The man explained the captain had crossed Crimson Ravine, unintentionally entering Lobelon's territory during the pursuit. He warned that Lobelon's lord, always seeking expansion, might see this as justification for aggression now. Ian reasoned they saved Lobelon's people from danger, wondering why that wouldn't count as goodwill instead. The man replied grimly, the lord of Lobelon valued power, not people, and would never see it that way. The advisor warned that provoking Lobelon further would result in war and countless civilian deaths across borders. Frustrated, Ian asked what else he could possibly do, get on his knees and plead for peace. The advisor calmly suggested they send someone quickly, offering reparations to diffuse tensions before it escalated. Ian was shocked, repeating the idea aloud. You want to give him money? Still trying to comprehend it. The advisor proposed 20,000 gold coins, leaving Ian stunned and shouting at the overwhelming cost. The advisor explained the payment was necessary for Lobelon to maintain dignity despite their border violation. Ian sighed in resignation, finally giving in, and told him to inform Tommen about the arrangement. Left alone, Ian leaned back, disappointed there'd be no reward for the captain or Cain after all. A guard entered the room and announced the arrival of the prisoner Ian had been waiting for. Cain was escorted inside by 2 knights, stepping firmly toward Ian as tension quietly filled the room. Cain knelt silently while Ian approached and ordered him to raise his head for questioning. Ian confirmed Cain's identity, asking if he truly was the expert in reading ancient languages and scripts. He then questioned Cain about a past incident involving a false promise to build a stone golem. Cain calmly responded he hadn't lied. He genuinely believed he could build it at that time. Ian pressed further, confused why Cain failed, pointing out the merchant's trust and financial investment in him. Cain defended himself, saying failure came before success, and that he truly believed in his own abilities. Ian asked directly what kind of golem Cain had promised to build back in that deal. Cain described a golem shaped like a human, able to perform complex tasks and even battle. He explained it would not need sleep or food, only orders from its master to operate endlessly. Ian was stunned, realizing such a creation could change how nations fought, defended, and possibly ruled forever.